Hey there guys, welcome to my playthrough of Resident Evil 3 OG. So now that this game is finally out on PS5, I can at least do a proper live commentary rather than just having to do a pre-recorded video and just overlaying commentary over that like I was having to do a Resident Evil 2 OG on the PS3. This is actually going to be a proper playthrough of Resident Evil 3 OG, very similar to what I did with Resident Evil 3 Remake. And I'll be going into a lot of detail regarding the story moments, the lore, the character moments, and the gameplay. And talking about the cutscenes, this game is filled with a lot of optional cutscenes because of the way the live selection system works, and that's another tangent we're talking about during this playthrough. But I've made sure to pull up the Resident Evil podcast team's timeline of important events in Resident Evil 3 OG. I've pulled up some stuff related to Nemesis, and I've pulled up Project Umbrella's file translations of the Japanese version, in case the Japanese version of the files is different to the American versions. Without further ado, let's get into this. I've already done multiple playthroughs of Resident Evil 3 OG, given that circumstances at the time prevented me from actually doing commentary, but now that things have eased up, I'm able to do commentary right now. So let's begin.
Resident Evil.
And I can actually pause the cutscenes, which is nice.
It all began as an ordinary day in September. An ordinary day in Raccoon City. A city controlled by Umbrella. No one dared to oppose them, and that lack of strength would ultimately lead to their destruction. I suppose they had to suffer the consequences of their actions, but there would be no forgiveness. If only they had had the courage to fight. It's true that once the wheels of justice begin to turn, nothing can stop them. Nothing. It was Raccoon City's last chance, and my last chance. My last escape.
Yeah, so not much to really glean from this intro cutscene of Resident Evil 3 OG compared to the intro cutscene of Resident Evil 3 Remake. But apparently on Capcom's official website, you can find a note from Jill that she left in her apartment before she began her escape, and it reads as follows. Early autumn, the arrival of nature, the scent of the forest, a cool breeze. Many times it was the beginning of a changing season. 1 month and a half has passed since the incident. September has arrived in Raccoon City, a small industrial town located in the American Midwest. Citizens have buried the memories as they return to their day-to-day lives. I don't understand what Jill means by this. Like, it's weird to make this statement like the citizens somehow knew about the mansion incident, or is she referring to something else? Like, it's a very vague statement she's making. The bizarre incident that occurred in the Arklay Mountains, the destruction of the Special Forces Unit, STARS, the contamination of man and animal at the Umbrella Inc. bioweapon laboratory in the mansion, the evil power of the T-virus which transforms them into hideous monsters. It was impossible for citizens to believe the survivors. Okay, so I guess when she says the citizens have buried the memories as they return to their day-to-day lives, I'm guessing she's referring to moments where STARS tried to bring the incident to light. At least with Chris, Jill, Rebecca, Barry, like those particular members of STARS. Of course, Chris isn't even in Raccoon City at this time because I think he's in Europe investigating the G-virus, which is odd considering that in Resident Evil 0, Rebecca and Enrico were literally right on top of Birkin's lab, which was one of the biggest story blunders in Resident Evil's history. The fact that they decided at the tail end of Resident Evil 0's development to shoehorn in the tram and elevator systems that lead to Birkin's lab and also the water treatment plant without considering the problems that would result from these decisions when considering Chris's diary from Resident Evil 2 OG was one of the biggest blunders in story designs ever in Resident Evil's history. Rebecca and Enrico literally missed the chance to destroy Birkin's lab and the G-virus in July of 1998, and it wouldn't be until September 1998 when Leon and Claire would inadvertently destroy his lab. That's just too funny thinking about it. But anyway, back to what this monologue is saying. After all, it was they who experienced fear and the existence of many bioweapons such as zombies. It sounded like imagination. Beyond imagination. The survivors did not wait for people to believe. Instead, they traveled to Europe to expose the huge evil. So that relates to what I said before about Chris being in Europe. Now, unusual things are occurring in Raccoon City. Murder is a frequent abnormality in the town, and a weird disease becomes prevalent. T-virus infection. Now, the Resident Evil podcast team did mention that there was some fallout from the mansion incident, so zombies and dogs that were infected by the T-virus from the mansion were actually getting to Raccoon City, and there was also a biohazard fallout in the tunnels that connected Birkin's lab to Raccoon City when Birkin transformed into G1 Birkin and those rats ingested the T-virus. So that's definitely why murder was a frequent abnormality in the town and why zombies started appearing well before September 23rd. At first, the evil was hidden until citizens gradually transformed into monsters. People cursed their foolishness, but it was too late. They had chosen their destiny, which is relating back to what Jill was saying in this intro here. Raccoon City was headed for disaster, and that is the end of her monologue.
This is Chopper Delta.
Now, this cutscene right here, the Resident Evil podcast team is saying that it takes place on September 27th, 1998. This is the pre-dawn hours. So legions of zombies are walking the streets, and you have these helicopters here that are dropping off platoons at E95070.
Preparing to drop off at area E95070.
But this is a pretty cool introduction to the zombies. And we saw just as many zombies in the intro to Resident Evil 3 Remake, though it was still very odd how Jill was just sleeping through the outbreak. I don't really understand how that's possible. Everything seemed very calm, and there was even like stuff happening on the TV. Like, why was she so slow to react to what was happening in the intro of Resident Evil 3 Remake? That's just really odd. It is still interesting how Spencer managed to use his political influences to doctor footage of the UBCS rescuing civilians and removing any instances of BOWs actually appearing on video. And he did this to delay the US government from taking action and to also give his Umbrella forces enough time to actually extract the G virus. But of course, that failed. And looking at the September 23rd part of the Resident Evil podcast team's timeline, they mentioned that post-midnight on September 23rd, a team of highly trained covert U.S. Special Forces soldiers begin their mission to extract William Birkin from Raccoon City. The operation is strictly classified, but government officials in charge remain unaware Umbrella already knows the details because of an intelligence leak. Thanks to the information on the G-Virus passed on to them by Birkin, the soldiers are bringing along a specialized prototype rail cannon designed to combat any G creature should there be any complications with the virus. Colonel Franklin Hart, who is actually mentioned in Resident Evil 3 OG, head of the Technology Division of Engineering, has expressed doubts about deploying this weapon so early, but the limited time window for this operation means they have no choice. He does concede that the weapon will be extremely effective against BOWs. And that's in that classified photo file you get just before the final boss fight of Resident Evil 3 OG. So this is not the US Special Forces that are being shown here. I mean, it does show police officers, but this is supposed to be the UBCS. I will say, this part is actually quite depressing for me. I mean, these soldiers and police officers are fighting valiantly against the zombies, and the music really adds to that tension and that bravery that they're displaying. And then the way the zombies overwhelm them and they just die, I mean, it's sad. I do like the tone of this particular scene and the choice of music and the way they portray the zombies overwhelming the officers. It is cool how they use certain scenes from this intro in the intro to Resident Evil 4 OG. And that concludes that. And I do wonder if the Resident Evil podcast team added some additional information, because they did mention that there's a photo that you can get in Resident Evil 3 which shows the policeman pressing forward, and it's dated September 27th, which is how you know this scene takes place on September 27th. So the RPD had this road outside of the Johnson National Bank blocked off, and it enabled civilians to shelter behind them and prevent the zombies from continuing onwards. At that moment, high up above the police, the UBCS Delta Platoon team ziplines down onto a building roof from their helicopter. All units are to proceed to Richmond and Victoria, and the team quickly hurries towards the nearest exit, eager to get their mission going. And now it begins to start the Resident Evil 3 OG. It kind of sucks that they didn't include a moment where you see the police fighting back against the zombies in the intro cutscene of Resident Evil 3 Remake. But then again, I mean, I feel like the priorities with what they were trying to achieve with Resident Evil 3 OG versus Resident Evil 3 Remake are vastly different, because I really do feel like Resident Evil 3 Remake is more focused on the story elements with Umbrella, more so than this game, because I don't really feel a story so much with Resident Evil 3 OG. A lot of the story elements are just kind of contained in files, and all we're doing is focusing on Jill, who's trying to escape the city, and then we see some moments with Nikolai talking about the supervisors, and it's an idea that can easily be summarized by saying that they use the UBCS as guinea pigs in order to collect combat data from the BOWs, and the supervisors were there to monitor them. But I think one of my subscribers did mention that Nikolai was actually betraying Umbrella at a certain moment, because he's very driven by money. And it's also unclear if Nikolai is alive, because of course you have that live selection at the end that allows you to either fight with Nikolai or negotiate with him. But Nikolai's presence doesn't really mean much. And I remember someone who commented on my Resident Evil 3 Remake playthrough, and they actually liked the idea of Nikolai working for a rival company and Umbrella at the same time in the Remake timeline, even though it's never made clear which rival company he works for. They felt this way because in the canon timeline, his scheme for obtaining money was superfluous since Umbrella was taken down in 2003, and his escape from Raccoon City was meaningless, and that's assuming the moment where Jill negotiates with Nikolai is the canon moment. They also felt that the remake neatly finishes Nikolai's story while still giving him room to return in a later entry, even if he's not working for the same rival organization that Wesker works for. I'm not really sure where I stand on Nikolai's character between both versions. It's entirely subjective, and I don't feel like Capcom would follow up on his character anyway. They didn't follow up on Natalia from Resident Evil Revelations 2, the family from Resident Evil 6, or even Rose from Resident Evil Village, so I don't expect much to come from Nikolai's changes. Of course, it would be surprising if he returned in Resident Evil 9, but I highly doubt that'd be the case. Yeah, her last chance for survival. This is a pretty cool moment. I really like the fear factor of this moment with being surrounded, and then Jill has to desperately bust through the door.
September 28th, daylight. The monsters have overtaken the city.
BOWs.
Somehow, I'm still alive.
Yeah, so this area that she's in is the Blue Mountain Storehouse, which was referenced in Resident Evil 3 Remake as well. And I believe, Ayamo-san's name is supposed to mean Blue Mountain, which is why it's called as such. And Ayamo-san is, of course, the director of Resident Evil 3 OG.
Okay, we've got to get out of here.
What? What do you think you're talking about? I just lost my daughter out there! How dare you tell me to go back outside?
Now, you do see his daughter in the clock tower because she was rescued by a UBCS soldier, but they both died, unfortunately.
I'm sorry about your daughter, but there isn't gonna be any rescue. We have to get out of here.
No! I'm not going anywhere. I'd rather starve to death in here than be eaten by one of those undead monsters! Now leave me alone!
Plot twist, Dario somehow survived the Thermoberg missile strike and is one of the main villains in Resident Evil 9. If they did that, that'd be too funny. But I can definitely understand why Dario wasn't given much of a presence in Resident Evil 3 Remake, given that he was just a random side character given a backstory and had no contributions to the story in this game. You know, I've never actually seen a Resident Evil 3 OG player thoroughly examine the areas to see if there's any, like, lore or anything, because I don't watch those kinds of people. I was mainly watching like speedrunners. Like, I've watched Resident Evil 3 OG gameplay for a very long time. Like, somewhere before 2014, I was actually exposed to Resident Evil 3 OG gameplay. You know, I had even seen a mod of Resident Evil 4 OG where, in Separate Ways OG, this player applied a mod where they replaced Ada with Jill and Sadler with Nemesis. It's a very old video. I don't even know if it's still up and running. They even overlaid Nemesis' sound effects whenever he would attack in that mod. So Resident Evil 3 OG adds a couple of new mechanics, like the ability to quick turn. So this was the first Resident Evil game to have a quick turn. It's a very fast quick turn. I don't know why in Resident Evil 1 Remake they made the quick turn incredibly slow. You can't call it a quick turn if it's slow. This is actually more of a quick turn. But that being said, the input for the quick turn, where you have to back up and press square, it can mess with you at times when you're dealing with camera angles, because the fixed camera angles swallow your inputs a lot in this game. It's one of the main follies of the fixed camera angle, and it's so obnoxious. The amount of times I get hit by a boss and I'm unable to dodge because the fixed camera angle change eats my input is obnoxious. But let me actually look at the files here. Okay, so they actually teach you how to aim at objects. Quick turn. Okay, emergency escape. Yeah, we already know that. There are times in Resident Evil 3 OG where you can break out of grabs without taking damage, but I don't really understand how it works. Like in Resident Evil Code Veronica X, you can break out of grabs without taking damage by baiting out the lunging grab that the zombies do, and then rotating the analog stick or using the D-pad. You can also do the same with the mods in the Antarctic base, but in Resident Evil 3 OG, it just seems kind of random how it works. I don't know if it's tied to a specific grab animation, or if it's just based on the speed of your inputs. It's confusing. Emergency dodging, and that is such a dumb name, emergency dodging. Like, what's the point of the emergency part? The only time you're ever going to use a dodge animation is in emergencies. It just seems like such a redundant name. It's about as confusing as the way they name certain moves in Devil May Cry 1 and Devil May Cry 2. Like, for instance, in Devil May Cry 2, they called the dodge a flip escape, and then they called the double jump air hike. Like, what's with these bizarre names? It really doesn't make sense. And people don't even call it, like, emergency dodging. They just say, like, emergency evade because it rolls off the tongue better, but just call it a dodge. But even then, the animation you're doing against the zombies where you push them, that's not a dodge, that's just a push animation. And the dodge animation is not only tied to your aiming animation, but also when you press the action button while aiming. However, you can't perform the push against zombies with the action button. You have to specifically use the aiming animation. Also, for some bizarre reason, if you have a gun out, you can only perform the action button dodge when your gun is loaded. If it has no ammo, you can't dodge with the action button while aiming. I have no idea why this is the case. And the thing is, you don't really have to use the dodge in this game unless you're talking about a boss like the Gravedigger. This is kind of a good thing because the dodge is a badly designed mechanic in Resident Evil 3 OG. It is terrible because Jill does multiple different animations for single attacks, and you don't get iframes when you dodge. And why on earth does it not cross the developers' minds to give iframes during a context-sensitive dodge that you have no control over? It's just so stupid. Like, the amount of times you get hit while dodging in this game, it happens like 95% of the time. And yet I've heard my subscribers say that they've never had problems, which is wild to me. Like, I don't know why they're saying that. I get screwed by the dodge all the time unless I'm doing the push animation against the zombies. But even with the push animation, it's weirdly programmed because there are times where Jill chooses to aim at the end of the animation, and so you're delayed from running past the zombie while they're stumbled. So I have no idea how to stop Jill from actually aiming at the end of the dodge animation. I have no idea if it's related to just simply tapping the dodge button or simply holding it. Does that have any kind of relevance to whether Jill aims at the end? Is it some bug with the dodge? Is it that the game is holding your aim button for some weird reason while you're dodging? It doesn't make sense. But there may be intention behind that. Maybe it's a way for Jill to stop other zombies from grabbing her after she escapes a grab or does the push animation, because I was always quite dumb with the old games where you break out of a grab, but then you're immediately grabbed by another zombie if they're surrounding you. But in Resident Evil 3 OG, it's possible that Jill aims at the end to potentially cue another push animation and counteract the chain grabbing from the zombies, but it's not done very well, and there's really no point in it because you're hardly in such positions where that's possible. Okay, you can get on or off certain objects that appear in the game. I don't know why it's saying press the action button. You can just hold the button as well. This game was actually the first Resident Evil game to give you the ability to hold the action button, and then as soon as you get near a door, you just go through it, or you just mantle onto an object. And we have these live selections, which are completely pointless, because there are certain live selections that are pointless. There's only ever one specific path you'll want to go on in order to make progression through the game a lot more bearable. So I don't really understand the point of giving these optional choices. It's just there to allow you access to additional cutscenes. But the fact that we can't even pinpoint which is the canon cutscene that occurs, like how Murphy dies or certain actions between Carlos and Jill, because we can't pinpoint which is the canon version, it kind of diminishes the value of certain cutscenes. Oh, so they actually tell you how to skip cutscenes in a tutorial like this. That's interesting. Not for this one. Crafting freeze rounds is really the only thing I use the crafting tool for. Freeze rounds are mandatory for Nemesis, because freeze rounds are the most powerful tool against Nemesis. And also, if you want, you can craft acid rounds against the Gravedigger and kill it a lot faster. But aside from that, there's really no need to craft other pieces of ammunition. The game does give you plenty of ammunition, as long as you know how to use the weapons intelligently. There's 13 different kinds of gunpowders in all. If you combine C with A, it's called AC. So, like, the last letter in that combination seems to dictate what kind of ammo you get. So like if A is your last letter, then you get handgun bullets. If B is your last letter, you get shotgun shells. But if it's C, you get either grenade rounds or magnum bullets if you're combining CCC. But there's also combinations like, I think you can get like BBA, or can you do like ABB, stuff like that? I mean, mainly you'll want to be applying your gunpowders to the actual grenade rounds, just to combine them better. And the enhanced ammo is kind of pointless, you don't really need it. But it's a nice addition either way. Something I also noticed when doing multiple playthroughs of Resident Evil 3 OG is the gunpowder locations are randomized, and also certain grenade round locations. So it seems like the gunpowders and the grenades are the only two ammunition types that seem to randomize, whereas with the pistol ammo and the shotgun ammo, or even with like the magnum rounds, or with other grenade types, they don't randomize, which was something I didn't know until I actually noticed it in these recent playthroughs I've been doing of Resident Evil 3 OG on the PS5. Let me just create a quick save. What a great feature. I never thought this kind of rewind feature would ever be possible for a console game. I know on the PC, there are certain games that allow you to quick freeze and then quick defrost to give you the illusion of a rewind function. But to have this kind of system built into Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 2 OG and Resident Evil 1 OG, that is just a brilliant feature. And it makes replaying bosses and practicing strategies for areas so much more enjoyable by providing a streamlined and less tedious process. You can also bypass having to go through those stupid loading doors when replaying certain parts. You don't even have to quit to the title menu to restart now. You can just load a quick save, and in less than a second, you're back in the game. You also don't have to waste time with the outdated ink ribbon system. The ink ribbon system in these old games is so dumb because you didn't have the ability to pick one ink ribbon out of a set, so anytime you saved, you unfortunately had some ink ribbon taking up a space in your inventory. So whenever you reset the game, you had to not only quit to the title menu, then watch the unnecessary text appearing on screen before loading in, but also go into the item box to deposit the ink ribbon. This entire process might as well be on par with a loading screen. It wasn't until 2017 that they finally gave you the ability to select only one of a certain item out of a set, but with this quick save function, you don't have to waste time with that and can just make the save immediately. This is a fine example of how much technology has evolved. The quick save and rewind functions are some of the greatest features I've ever seen in gaming history. This is the ideal way to experience these older titles without having to be hindered by some outdated and tedious designs. This is truly remarkable. And talking further about the ink ribbon system, the Resident Evil games always gave you plenty, so saving was never an issue, but it's still dumb how the idea of checkpoints was consolidated to be like a payment or a transaction. Like, it's really silly. Of course, this isn't as bad as the stupid yellow orb system in Devil May Cry 1, where you're forced to use the yellow orb every time you die, and it doesn't replenish your items at all. It puts you right outside of a boss door, so that's a good checkpoint. But again, why the hell would you designate good checkpoints as a form of currency? That's really scummy and really stupid. The idea of good checkpoints being like a monetized feature, like what is up with that? That's really dumb.
I told you! I'm not leaving! Never! Just get away from me.
Yeah, again, totally understandable why Dario didn't have much of a presence in Resident Evil 3 Remake. So pretty much until we get to Carlos, Nikolai, Mikhail, we're just kind of aimlessly going through Resident Evil 3 OG. Like, there's no real story for quite a long time in Resident Evil 3 OG, whereas in Resident Evil 3 Remake, you get right into the story moments immediately. I can definitely understand why a lot of content in Resident Evil 3 OG was cut out in Resident Evil 3 Remake because of the fact that Resident Evil 3 Remake wanted to focus more on the story and, you know, like other things with the characters so that there's more focus right there. That's totally understandable. Like, you know, in Resident Evil 3 Remake, once you do that whole moment with getting out of the apartment and dealing with Nemesis and then Carlos saves you, I mean, you've already met up with him and you're getting into the big story moments, you're rescuing survivors, you're getting the chance to talk with Carlos on the radio, which is cool. And it's so funny how Leon and Claire never really talk with each other over the radio because you only ever talk with Marvin twice over the radio and that's it. So why introduce the radio in the first place in Resident Evil 2 Remake? But in Resident Evil 3 Remake, Jill is constantly talking with Carlos, so there's actual reason to have a radio, and they're coordinating with each other in order to rescue survivors and to get out of the city. And at the same time, you're also seeing like Nikolai acting the way he is. You're hearing about Carlos not being aware of like Umbrella's motives. Definitely understandable in certain ways. And as one of my subscribers mentioned, Resident Evil 3 starts on September 28th, but around the time Jill gets to the clock tower, it's like September 29th. Then she falls unconscious until October 1st. And as the subscriber mentioned, Nikolai was loyal to Umbrella in the OG, but he was killing other supervisors to attain a stronger bargaining position to demand more money as the only one with the data. He wants to kill Jill for the same reason. And as the same subscriber mentioned, before you meet Carlos's team, absolutely nothing happens story-wise. Jill just fumbles around the city without a goal, and it's why the beginning is streamlined the way it is in Resident Evil 3 Remake. And as such, because of the fact that you don't really get much of a story in the first initial moments of Resident Evil 3 OG, you end up rushing what little story the first hour of the OG has and get to the meat of it. I don't know if that was just because of the development issues, because of course, game development during the generation that Resident Evil 3 OG released in, so this game released in 1999, it was just very bizarre because technology wasn't adapted very well, and technology constraints were also a big issue. Also, I know people criticize Resident Evil 3 Remake for not allowing Jill to go to the RPD, but Jill doesn't really do anything in the RPD anyway in Resident Evil 3 OG. She had no narrative reason to be there in the OG anyway. I also do like how in Resident Evil 3 Remake they focus more on the US government's corruption, whereas in Resident Evil 3 OG you don't really hear any mention of the US government. So it's nice that they incorporated those kind of story moments in Resident Evil 3 Remake. And back when Resident Evil 3 OG released, a lot of that stuff regarding the US government's corruption and their involvement with the production of POWs was all contained within supplementary material. So the fact that they're taking the time to incorporate supplementary material information into Resident Evil 3 Remake is good. It's a great chance to actually implement story moments that they couldn't implement in Resident Evil 3 OG. At least these zombies aren't like Code Veronica's zombies where they can seamlessly transition between a passive state and a turbo state randomly. The zombies in this game will only favor a passive or a turbo state and will only choose to swap states if they drop their arms or get flinched. It's also nice that the game gives you the shotgun right here. The fact that they're placing key weapons right next to key items implies that the game wants you to experiment with weapons because they want you to respect the threats that are coming. I mean, you don't really have to deal with them though. I mean, a lot of the time you're just running past the enemies because it's better that way, and because it can be quite tedious trying to fight them. But it is cool how certain enemies have vulnerabilities to specific weapons, like with the Drain Demos. The freeze rounds and the incendiary rounds will kill them instantly. There's a lot of room for experimentation in Resident Evil 3 OG, and even though this gameplay loop is pretty much exactly the same as Resident Evil 2 OG, something about Resident Evil 3 OG is a lot more engaging and a lot more fun to go through. That guy came very close to turboing, it looked like. And then Brad is here.
Get away!
I will say, the way they handle Brad in this game is certainly better than what they did in Resident Evil 3 Remake. I have no idea why they made Brad so cringe in Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's like Arclay on steroids. And he's just making all these weird jokes. Like, why would they do that?
Brad, why isn't someone doing something about this?
What are you expecting them to do? It's been almost 2 months since the events of Resident Evil 1 OG. Why are you making that kind of statement now?
No one's trained to handle this kind of situation. What could anyone do?
That just seems kind of redundant for Jill to say right here. She knows that a lot of the officers in the RPD and a lot of the civilians don't believe what the STARS members have gone through in the mansion incident. So, like, why would she make that kind of statement?
Listen, he's coming for us. We're both gonna die.
What are you saying?
You'll see. He's after STARS members. There's no escape.
And Brad doesn't care to elaborate further. It's so odd. For someone like him who had a close relationship with Jill, you'd think he'd be saying more. But I do question what Jill was doing before the events of Resident Evil 3 OG. So upon their return to Raccoon City, Jill compiled a detailed incident report for Chief Irons and worked with Chris and Barry to warn the authorities about Umbrella's biological weapons. But their claims were scoffed at, and their request for official investigations into the corporate giant denied. It took 2 full weeks for Jill's wounds to heal, and throughout that time suffered flashbacks and painful memories of her teammates dying. In the following week, she noticed Chris was acting erratically at work, and she had to intervene when she uncharacteristically got into a fight with a junior officer. After he had been placed on a leave of absence, Jill visited his apartment, where he showed her fragments from research documents concerning the in-development G virus. Really? So she already knows about the G virus? You'd think she would talk about it. She suddenly realized that ever since their return from the mansion, Chris has been investigating Umbrella alone. She wanted to help him, and together they confided with Barry and decided to fly to Europe to investigate Umbrella's main headquarters. But Barry decided to first ensure his family's safety and took them to Canada. This prompted Jill to decide to remain in Raccoon City a little while longer and investigate Umbrella's laboratories before joining up with Chris on a later date. Unfortunately, Jill's decision to remain behind saw her caught up in the biohazard that engulfed the city in late September. During the early stages, she remained holed up in her apartment until she eventually realized no rescue was coming and she had to escape on her own. By now, the city was completely blockaded, and Umbrella had deployed the Nemesis T-Type to track down and destroy the remaining STARS members left in the city. And it's specifically Umbrella Europe. So Nemesis was actually created by Umbrella Europe in order to capitalize on the success the American branch had with the Tyrant program. But it is still strange, Jill already knowing about the G virus. I mean, I'm surprised she doesn't mention it in the game. In fact, I remember there was like some extra files in, I think, the Nintendo 64 version of Resident Evil 2 OG. There's a file from Jill that you can get in Resident Evil 2 EX on the Nintendo 64 version, I believe. So she mentions this. July 24th, 1998, Raccoon Forest. The following documents were obtained at a sanatorium owned by Umbrella Corp. Umbrella Bioorganic Weapon Publicity Material, DevCode MA39 Cerberus, DevCode MA121 Hunter, DevCode FI3 Neptune, DevCode T002 Tyrant. In addition to the above, it is believed that several other BOWs were created by means of accidental infection. During the course of the test, it was discovered that the contagion is not limited to human beings and may pose a hazardous risk to plant and animal life forms. Effective means of controlling this contagion have yet to be found. Raccoon City Police Department, STARS Alpha Team, Jill Valentine. So that doesn't really say much, and Brian Irons had suppressed such materials anyway. So there's also a report from Chris as well. So he says this: Dear Chief, below is my account of what led up to the explosion of the mansion. On July 23rd, STARS Bravo team, led by Captain Marini, went to investigate the bizarre homicides that occurred in the Arclay Mountains. After contact with the team's chopper was lost, STARS Alpha team, led by Captain Wesker, went in. We found the remains of Bravo team's helicopter on the ground. After landing, we were immediately attacked by bloodthirsty dogs. We later discovered that these dogs were actually zombie dogs, as as they did not even feel our gunfire. After Joseph Frost was killed, we were forced to retreat to a nearby mansion. After further investigating the mansion, we learned that it was actually a secret laboratory of Umbrella Inc. All researchers were turned into zombies by some kind of unknown virus. We also discovered that Umbrella was using that lab as a testing area for new bioorganic weapons. We found the dead bodies of some of the Bravo team members, including Enrico Marini, Kenneth Sullivan, Forrest Speyer, and Richard Aiken. We believe that those bioorganic weapons caused their deaths. After that, we discovered that Captain Wesker was actually working with Umbrella, which is not true because he was a rogue operative working for the rival organization who was actually betraying Umbrella, and that both Alpha and Bravo teams were being used as live test subjects for the bioorganic weapons. Wesker had betrayed us. We barely managed to survive that nightmare. However, since the mansion exploded, there is no evidence to support our claims of Umbrella's secret lab or the bioorganic weapons, which is odd, considering that the files they collected in Resident Evil 1 OG should have served as evidence, yet they didn't present any of those files? How can he say that they don't have evidence? It's one of the main problems with games like these where they have all these collectible files, but they don't treat the collectible files as diegetic to the universe of Resident Evil. It's only with certain files. So that's pretty odd how he says we don't have any evidence to support our claims. The zombie phenomenon that has been occurring in the city is extremely similar to the zombies we saw at the mansion. We suspect that Umbrella is somehow linked to all this. In order to solve this mystery and put an end to the zombies that are roaming the city, I propose we launch a formal investigation into Umbrella. Thank you for your attention to this extremely important matter. Chris Redfield, Stars Alpha Team. There is also a reporter's memo in Resident Evil 2 EX. He says this: "At last, I have found the evidence I need to prove that the cannibal disease is indeed happening in the city. One man actually ate people to death. He was like a savage animal tearing away a new flesh. It was completely disgusting. I have heard rumors that many people are also suffering from this disease now. However, the cause of the disease is not yet known. Is this another mystery of the present disease? I will have to check on it." And we know that in certain files that you get later on in the hospital of Resident Evil 3 OG, there were doctors who were dealing with the T-virus infection in patients, but they were unaware of what it was. Oh, here's Brad's note from Resident Evil 2 EX. "No, it's that monster in the black suit again. Why does that thing keep chasing me? What did I do? This must be someone's sick idea of a joke. If I knew things were going to end up like this, I would have left the STARS team a long time ago, but whining won't help me now. I know I'm finished. Oh. In my hometown Delucia, or Delucia, I don't know how it's pronounced, I bet the flowers are in bloom. If I could only see them once more before I die." Okay, there's another file from Jill in Resident Evil 2 EX, but it's literally the same dialogue as what was said in the intro of Resident Evil 3 OG. That's interesting. So apparently when they designed the N64 version of Resident Evil 2 OG, they just decided to take that note that Jill made and convert it into an audio file for Resident Evil 3 OG's intro. It's literally the exact same lines. And that's all the Resident Evil 2 EX files that actually have relevance here. But let's move on. Here's a file here. Yeah, the St. Michael Clock Tower. You don't really do much at the Clock Tower in Resident Evil 3 OG, so I can definitely understand why they cut it out in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Or not really cut it out, they just have you fight Nemesis on the outside. Now this part here is random, there's no telling if these... Yep. The detection on the door can be atrocious when you're trying to get through. I could have been grabbed easily just then because you just get screwed by bad detection sometimes. But yeah, Jill just goes to the RPD for some reason, just to get a lockpick. Yeah, sometimes with these areas, you're just doing such a silly thing just to make progress. You go to this prominent location from Resident Evil 2 OG just to get a lockpick. And also a blue jewel. And you just reunite with Brad so easily, so why he left Joe behind back in that bar area is confusing. Well, having Brad be killed by Nemesis certainly has more sense than him being killed by zombies in Resident Evil 3 Remake. But let me just show you how bad the dodge system is against Nemesis. I'm gonna make a quick save here. Come on. Like, look at that. She doesn't choose to crouch, she just jumps backwards like that. Like, why does she have to do multiple different dodge animations for single attacks? It just doesn't make sense. See that? That was a dodge and I got hit while dodging because she did the wrong kind of animation. Again, why they don't give you iframes when you dodge is just baffling, and why she does multiple different dodge animations against single attacks, it makes no sense at all. It's also dumb because you end up getting put into walls in the process, because if Jill is just continually jumping backwards into walls, this can put her into a position where she can be hit more easily while dodging. Again, bullshit, that didn't even touch me. You can't trust the dodge system on this game, it's atrocious. Resident Evil Revelations has a shitty dodge, but I never got hit while dodging. I got hit a lot after the dodge, before I even had the chance to recover, which is stupid. It gets a lot worse when you get to the clock tower fight. But there's absolutely no incentive to fight Nemesis, aside from getting some weapon parts for a different type of pistol, some first aid sprays, and other things. Like, you don't need those. It's just there as some kind of reward for those who want to get all the weapons or something, or to just satisfy some kind of petty bravado and petty pride that they have. Now, this is where you'll see a lot of the random spawns here. So it's random where these zombies are. So I got the bad part. So it's where this zombie is right next to you, and the other zombies are kind of scattered around. There's Marvin Brana. He's been fatally wounded, and a lot of people found confusion with this particular statement in the English localization, because fatally wounded would imply that Marvin is dead, but the Japanese developers at the time didn't really understand what fatally wounded meant to Americans, which is why it was put in this way. Marvin's report. Let me pull this up just so I understand the Japanese translation, because it could be different to the American one. So the Japanese version says, a theft occurred at City Hall early this morning on September 24th. The stolen items were 2 of the 12 jewels embedded in the dial of the jewel-laden clock at the main gate. Raccoon City is currently under martial law, and many police officers have already been killed in the line of duty. Therefore, I will be suspending the investigation of this case. Huh? Okay, so there's no mention of the martial law and the police officers being killed in the line of duty in the English localization. September 26th. Today at approximately 10 a.m., it was revealed during an autopsy that a 42-year-old male, who was a restaurant manager, who took shelter in the station, was found in possession of one of the jewels stolen at City Hall on the 24th of this month. The man was shot to death due to onset of the disease a few minutes later. The investigation of this case has been suspended due to martial law. Okay, so he mentions the martial law here, but as evidence, the jewel will be stored inside the station for a while. So I've already memorized the 4 codes for this particular lock. It's either a 0131, 0513, 4011, or 4312. I can remember 0513 easily because in Resident Evil 7, Lucas jokingly gives a code and he says 0514, which is not so different to 0513. It's just the last digit that's different. 4312 is the code. I was a bit sloppy with the movement. You never want to run past that female zombie because she can turbo sometimes or be slightly faster while walking. So weird how the statues are gone. Like certain puzzle elements from Resident Evil 2 OG are not here. And also, I shouldn't have even been able to leave the evidence room because she would have needed the diamond key to even leave the evidence room. So magically, you're just able to go through the door without needing those special keys. It is definitely an indication that the keys and those doors are not diegetic to the world of Resident Evil. So this weapon here is random. It's either the grenade launcher or the Magnum. It doesn't matter so much because you can still do a lot of this without having to deal with the enemies too much. To the rowdy kids in Stars, my big bro Joe's got some good news for ya. He's finally finished the new standard handgun. He's calling it the M92F Stars Special Samurai Edge. It's the most balanced among all Kendo-made custom guns. As Joe says, if any SOB misses their mark with a gun this good, they should keep a pacifier in their holster instead. So they actually say a teething ring instead of a pacifier in the English localization. At least Robert isn't talking weirdly in the English localization. I'll have the detailed specs attached upon delivery as well. The parts are so good, it's hard to believe they're government-issued merchandise. You'll want to smooch the company who financed it. Kendo Gun Shop Robert Kendo. And it is still pretty cool how in Resident Evil 7, Blue Umbrella used some of the weapon specs from Albert Wesker's secret research to make a better version of the Samurai Edge, which was the Alberto 1. That was a really nice choice. And by the way, Joe Kendo actually works for Blue Umbrella. All this for a lockpick. Wow. Its disorganization probably reflects the owner's personality, I guess. And here's Rebecca's first aid pack. You have the pistol ammo here. This is Barry's. And I think you can see the picture of the STARS members. Yeah, you can. Yeah, Jill doesn't really make any kind of emotional reaction to anything here, so it's pretty pointless for her to go here just to get a lockpick.
No. Come anyone. Our platoon is cut off.
Carlos?
No survivors found. This is Carlos. Send in support immediately.
Must have been an open frequency. That's still not enough to say that the game has a story right now at this moment. But also, I remember in Carcinogen SDA's interview, the reason why these boards are here over the doors is because there are still survivors inside of the RPD. That's what Ioma-san said to Carcinogen SDA. So at a certain point, the survivors remove the barricades after Jill kills some of the zombies and Nemesis leaves. But then they're overwhelmed because the file in Resident Evil 2 OG, from what I remember, there was like Shelter the Wounded. Shelter the Wounded refers to the survivors that are here. But then eventually they're overwhelmed, which is why there are zombies in the RPD. Like, that's a really cool detail on Ayoma-san's part with Resident Evil 3 OG. Then Nemesis comes in, and it's also good to have Nemesis around because he despawns certain enemies, making it a lot easier to get through rooms. There's a mercenary's diary. Wonder if they say anything different in the Japanese version. September 1st, I finished 6 months of special training. My body appears to have finally regained its edge as well. I was a capable soldier, but got sentenced to death by firing squad on suspicion of groundless charges. Under torture, I was forced to confess. And as the English localization says, I was tortured and forced to give a false confession. Because of course, confessions and lies are the same. To confess, one must tell lies in these kinds of situations, as Franz Kafka would say. That morning, I awaited the firing squad. All of a sudden, a miracle came out of nowhere. The company picked me up and offered me a chance to live. September 15th, I cut my vacation short and returned to HQ. Looks like my unit, the UBCS, has been called into action. Umbrella's got their own military unit for the purpose of combating corporate terrorism and VIP kidnapping, but they also retain cleaners specialized in dealing with problems caused by shady merchandise. I belong to the latter unit. And in the English localization, they say nightmen instead. I don't know if it makes more sense to say shady merchandise in the Japanese version or illegal products in the English localization, because I feel like the use of illegal products would imply that this guy knows that Umbrella's shady, or was he told that the viral incident was the result of something else? And it's not just Umbrella who has their own unit. We know Umbrella also hired external companies. That's why in Resident Evil Death Island, Dylan's team was part of a separate unit. As his captain said, we're almost at Raccoon City, so listen up. The city's on lockdown. Orders are to assist in the evacuation of Umbrella Corp execs and government officials only. No civilians. Repeat, no civilians. What if they try to get past us? You're clear to shoot to kill. So the Umbrella Corp execs and government officials being described in Resident Evil Death Island is interesting because there's a file in Resident Evil 1 OG that talks about the helipad at the top of the lab, and they mention the government officials and Umbrella Corp execs. So it was really cool of Resident Evil Death Island's developers to reference that file from Resident Evil 1 OG specifically, and I think it's also mentioned in Resident Evil 1 Remix files. I'm not sure. There are all sorts of companies involved with this, not just Umbrella's own military unit. And I recall that Blue Umbrella, when they were first established, they didn't have access to their own unit because of sanctions and several conditions imposed by the United Nations. September 28th, dawn comes. Doesn't change the fact we're in hell, though. It's madness. There's no natural order to be found in this town. All those who die become ravenous corpses seeking living flesh. I should have opted to be shot. The camp would be heaven compared to this place. I'll be strong and pull the trigger myself and pray my corpse won't start to move. So I think it makes more sense to say there are no provisions of any kind here, rather than saying there's no natural order to be found in this town. But of course, we know that Robert Kendo did distribute his ammo supplies around Raccoon City. I think it was just around Raccoon City. Let me check that again. Yeah, Robert's note. How could this have happened, Barry? The town's been overrun by zombies and has literally become a nightmare on Earth. As you know, my concern for the town is as great as your own. I have waited for your arrival with the assumption you were still in the area, but the threat of my shop being overwhelmed by zombies has become too great. I've already distributed the majority of weapons and ammo to the town's survivors, including the Raging Bull you specially ordered. I hope you understand given the circumstances. At any rate, I have no intention of pointlessly sacrificing my life and will be retreating to Stoneville. If you get this message, meet me there. We'll go fishing. Well, going fishing after traumatic incidents like that. Does that really make sense? I guess he's really trying to quell the demons in his mind, thanks to Raccoon City. Yeah, but he did distribute weapons and ammunition to the town survivors, so does that contest this statement of there are no provisions of any kind here? And we know that these UBCS members, they took some kind of antibody, or was that only with the supervisors? I need to look at the later files when given the chance. We move on, and here's a crashed bus. Whoa, I almost ran right into that dog because I was not looking. But right here, you can gain access to the cord here, which is one of the things you need to power the train. So I'm going to go ahead and put the shotgun and the grenade launcher away. You really only need the pistol for a lot of the sections in Resident Evil 3 OG. So this part right here, you've got to run straight and then turn right to bypass the dogs here. And then here you come across the Drain Demos or the Brain Sucker. I think there's two variants, but you've got to run in a specific way so that this Drain Demos doesn't melee you. You have to hold up and right on the D-pad and just go all the way to the right and then loop this way. Because if you go far enough, he'll walk instead of try to melee you. And the restaurant is one of the locations where you can get random gunpowder drops. I just got the regular gunpowder A's, but that's not really what I need. I need the gunpowder B's as well. City Guide, Mayor's Comments. City Guide, the history of our mayor and city. Greetings to you citizens, one and all. You all know Raccoon City offers its residents outstanding safety and comfort. You're right. Raccoon City is a city that attracted a factory of the ubiquitously clean company Umbrella, which is strange wording, but that's usually what happens when you're translating from Japanese to English. There's always some weird grammar moments because of the way the translation works. So they oftentimes have to fix the grammar and the wording in order to have it make more sense in the English localization, but there can be some errors as well. Like Resident Evil Revelations, the Japanese to English translation is full of errors, as the Resident Evil podcast team mentioned. So you have to trust the Japanese files of Resident Evil Revelations more so than the English localization. So the English localization mentions that the vast donations from Umbrella Inc. have been used for welfare work, the construction of public utilities, and to help maintain public peace. In the Japanese version, the company generously invested a large amount of financial support into welfare, policing, and constructing public facilities. 1992, which marked my 5th year since becoming mayor, was a memorable one for Raccoon City. With Umbrella's financial support, our deteriorating city hall was renovated and a modern general hospital was also built within the city. It seems a bit strange that they would talk about the hospital here when you don't get to the hospital until you get to the clock tower. It was also the year a bronze statue of me was erected inside City Hall in recognition of my efforts in service to the city. I visited this town as an engineer over 35 years ago to work on electrifying the city as well as install the street tramways. It is the knowledge of our predecessors that has helped Raccoon City develop into the aspirational city we have today. I swear an oath to uphold that tradition and devote myself to the further flourishing of the city. Raccoon City Mayor Michael Warren. And we know that Catherine Warren was infected and she was captured by Brian Irons and killed. And Irons was a sexual predator, so he wanted the mayor for himself, and he also went insane because he was already unhinged, and the Raccoon City disaster amplified his insane tendencies, and he killed a lot of people for sport. But this part right here is one of the most pointless live selection choices because it's always better to not do the live selection. And the problem is, when you do certain live selections, you influence the spawning of certain enemies. I'm not too sure which ones these apply to, but if you don't do the live selection, Nemesis will just be chasing you, and you won't have any enemies getting in your way for the time being. And I'm not really sure what Jill's reason is for actually going down here. Okay, so after I did this playthrough, I went to the newspaper office instead of the restaurant, and it turns out if you go to the newspaper office first, Carlos is teleported there, and the green jewel is moved to this sub-level over here, but you get zombies inside of the restaurant. So that's why this fire hook for opening this door here exists, but I don't understand why you would want to go to the newspaper office first, not to mention the dialogue between Jill and Carlos at the newspaper office is so cringe.
What's that?
Calm down, lady.
I'm not entirely sure how he got behind Jill. Resident Evil's always had moments where characters just appear out of nowhere in very strange ways.
I'm no zombie. My name's Carlos, Corporal of Umbrella's Biohazard Countermeasure Force. What's your
I'm with the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service. UBCS for short.
name?
Jill, did you just say you belong to Umbrella's army?
Yeah, we came all the way out here to save you civilians, but the mission went bad the minute we landed.
At least with this exchange of dialogue, there's no kind of moment where Carlos tries to flirt with Jill. It's just so cringe when you go to the newspaper office first. And there's no logic with going to the newspaper office first because the restaurant is literally right in front of you when you enter the area. Yeah, just don't do the live selection. There's just no point. And it's always easy to run past Nemesis because he does the same punch every time.
I need to ask you something.
And they just casually talk. I'm sure they probably do this when they use that explosive in order to ignite the gas in the restaurant. But still, though, it seems a bit odd for a transition.
Why did Umbrella send your team here?
Our mission is to rescue the civilians.
How kind of you. Considering Umbrella caused all this in the first place, those liars!
Look, we're just mercenaries, hired hands. No time for talking. If you can believe me, then join us. Think about it.
And I would just separate. Like, it's always so odd with these older Resident Evil titles how you have characters together, but they just separate for no reason. You know, in Resident Evil 2 OG, there were a couple of moments where Leon and Claire were together, but they never stayed together. And it just made no sense. Whereas in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, Leon and Claire stayed together because they understood it'd be far too dangerous to split up. And I can't help but feel like the reason why they put in that fence scene in Resident Evil 2 Remake is to have it make more logical sense why Leon and Claire would be separated. But even if that scene between Leon and Claire was done so poorly with them just like flirting with each other just to satisfy the horny fans who wanted Leon and Claire to get married. Like, it was just such a badly written scene in Resident Evil 2 Remake. But I understood what they were trying to go for, to have the idea of Leon and Claire being separated make more sense than just having them be together and then choosing to separate for no reason, when this is their first time ever dealing with the zombies. And they've seen plenty of dead bodies of people who are alone, so it does seem a bit odd that they would just separate like this. But Nemesis comes in, and you've got to get into the safe room very quickly. And Nemesis's placement can be pretty random. Sometimes he'll be right outside this door, other times he'll be outside the next door. Let's see where he is. Okay, he's beyond the next door. This part here is a really stupid placement of Nemesis, because in order to get past him effectively, you have to make sure he walks. But most of the time, he runs at you. And if he runs at you, there's no way you can get past him properly. And he's gonna run immediately, I just know it. Yep. See, I have no time to run past him or react, so I have to go through the door. And the dodge system is useless in this game, and completely broken. There's nothing I can do to avoid that, so I have to wait until he walks. Yeah, I mentioned before in my Resident Evil 3 Remake playthrough that the city encounters with Nemesis aren't really done that well, because you have to rely upon some weird methods to even get past Nemesis. Some of his placements can be pretty stupid. Come on. You know, in my previous playthroughs, Nemesis only ran once, and then he would walk, but here I'm getting more than one. Now it's like 3 times. Oh my god. I mean, this happened with Carcinogen STA in one of his walkthroughs of Resident Evil 3 OG. I think Nemesis ran like 6 times before he eventually started walking. Jesus Christ. Give me an opening, dude. Oh, there we go. That's my chance. And there are other areas you could potentially go to. Oh, shit! I completely forgot the blue jewel, didn't I? I have to load this now. But look how fast the loading is. That is just incredible that the game loads that fast, so you can even do it before you even get to the title menu. Like, once the game is loaded and you're on that black screen, you can just go to the quick save menu and just load it, and you're just in the game immediately. This is how you do a remaster of Resident Evil 3 OG. And with these, like, classic games, this is the definitive way to experience the classic games. Yeah, very unfortunate that I forgot that blue jewel. But that's only because I was very focused on the commentary, and that kind of stuff happens when you're invested. And I messed up. Wow, I'm amazed I got past him. Okay, so I got the Magnum this time. But something I want to talk about right now is that there was an interview done by Games Radar where they interviewed the producer and director of Resident Evil Requiem on August 27, 2025, and one of the questions Games Radar asked them was whether Resident Evil Requiem would continue certain plot points from Resident Evil 7 or Village, and they admitted that it was common for a new Resident Evil game to not pick up the exact thread that was left in the previous game. And as an example of this, they actually cited Resident Evil 6's introduction of Jake and how he not only hasn't been used in the future title, but the very next game, Resident Evil 7, focused entirely on Ethan Winters instead, which is very profound coming from the developers at Capcom, because Capcom doesn't often talk about Resident Evil 6. I mean, they last talked about Resident Evil 6 in Resident Evil Death Island when Chris was talking about Piers, but other than that, they're very tight-lipped about certain details from Resident Evil 6. But they then mentioned that there are many parallel threads in motion, meaning the characters are definitely out there somewhere, and they often choose where they're going to focus their spotlight, which is why Resident Evil Requiem isn't a continuation of Resident Evil 7 and Village's story. They even took the time to mention Chris and the BSAA from Resident Evil Village briefly, before diverting onto the fact that Resident Evil Requiem focuses on the Raccoon City storyline instead. From my point of view, that just feels like a jab to me personally, because the BSAA now being a rotten, ruined organization is a very significant plot point that could tie into Blue Umbrella's rise to power and a potential return to Raccoon City easily without having to abandon the story point set up in Resident Evil 7 and Village. I mean, in the Not a Hero DLC for Resident Evil 7, when Veronica talks with Chris about Blue Umbrella's members, she says, and I quote, "A lot of our members have been with us since even before we reincorporated as a PMC," which by itself says a lot about Blue Umbrella's darker side and how some of these members may have ties to Raccoon City in a way. And yet, Capcom will likely not make Blue Umbrella and the BSAA central focuses in Requiem, which will not only suck, but also be quite jarring, because you can't just brush off the fact that the world's leading counter-bioterrorist organization is now a rotten, ruined organization by 2021. And the thing is, this isn't the first time Capcom has done this, because the family from Resident Evil 6 was established as being the secret organization that has existed since America was first founded, and how they've subtly manipulated the politics of America, but they're only mentioned one time in the novelization of Resident Evil Vendetta and then never seen again. The gravitas of their influence is not matched by their presence within the Resident Evil media. But even then, they don't feel as prominent of an organization as the BSAA, who have appeared in multiple Resident Evil media as being the good guys. Making them a rotten, ruined organization in 2021 feels like a bigger shift than what Capcom did with the family, which is why brushing off the BSAA would feel even more jarring in Resident Evil Requiem. And if the BSAA is mentioned in some way in Requiem, that'll be very surprising, but I don't think I should hold out hope for their presence, as well as with Blue Umbrella's presence. This is also such a bizarre setup of the city. I mean, no city would ever look like this. And when you take this compass, for some reason, a surge happens and you get blocked off by electricity or like water. I don't recall. It's no wonder why they changed up the city locations in Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake to have it make more sense realistically. And they also cut out a lot of the puzzles that just kind of detract from the experience and prevent you from actually getting to the horrors and enemies. With city structure like this, it's no wonder Raccoon City had such a high murder rate. Usually city structure is a good way of actually knowing if a city has a lot of crime or not. But another question asked by Games Radar was how they went into designing the ruins of Raccoon City and Resident Evil Requiem, and the developers said that they didn't go into a physics simulation of how the experimental thermobaric missile strike would have affected Raccoon City. They did think about where the missile strike occurred in the city, the blast zone, and the resulting shockwave in order to provide a certain level of believability while still having creative freedom to design Raccoon City. So it was all part of a dilemma with preserving iconic locations and making them recognizable to fans, and also providing a sense of tragedy and loss when looking at the ruins. I guess that's to be expected from video game developers, and let's be real, Resident Evil Outbreak's portrayal of the experimental thermobaric missile strike's blast seemed a bit too extreme with the way the ruins looked, but even then, multiple characters mentioned Raccoon City being literally wiped from the map. Not to mention in Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 3 Remake, it literally looked like the blast engulfed the entire city, which wouldn't allow structures to remain standing. And are there older BOWs within these ruins of Raccoon City? Were they hiding within those tall buildings on the outskirts of the blast zone? If so, you have to wonder how they can still be around if the ruins of Raccoon City were constantly being monitored. Like, look, my main issue isn't with the way the ruins look, but with the rationale and story reasons behind returning to such a location, especially when the Raccoon City tragedy was nowhere near as bad as the Adonia and Lancheng incidents from Resident Evil 6. Even the Baker incident was spiraling out of control, with the eta-butamycete interacting with the local plant and animal life, and it was so bad that Blue Umbrella had to erect a quarantine wall around the area. So, in an era of constantly evolving BOWs, Raccoon City is the last location I would think of regarding new terrorists creating BOWs. And this part here with the newspaper office, they placed Nemesis in such a way where he blocks the camera, and he's in such a narrow space as well, and you have to run towards his right-hand side to force him to do that grab that's easy to run past. The fact that you're relying upon really odd methods like that to bypass these bad placements of Nemesis is pretty silly. That's what I mean when I say that the city encounters with Nemesis weren't really done that well, because you had to rely upon some pretty bizarre strategies to get past Nemesis in certain cases. So in a lot of ways, Nemesis really isn't that random predator that this game is lauded for. He's just like Mr. X, but he's only random if you're playing the game wrong. That's the thing. Okay, so just here. Yeah, there we go. Oh my god, that was really close. Yeah, sometimes Nemesis cancels the recovery frames of his animations to allow him to just sprint like that. It makes no sense. I don't know if there's a certain number of walk cycles that Nemesis has to do before he sprints, so maybe because he walked the right amount of cycles, he's then able to sprint, and sometimes he can jump down right here, but you have plenty of time to get the jewels in, because he at least roars, which is good design. Hard to believe this is City Hall. Don't even go inside City Hall. You just kind of go in the adjacent buildings. Now, this part right here, either the zombies will be sleeping or they'll be active. And these zombies, it's best you get rid of them because at times they can be a hindrance when you're trying to escape Nemesis. And yet again, there's no story happening right now. We just met up with Carlos, but nothing has happened yet. If you turn around, there's some shotgun shells here. And here is the tram. Kevin, as my apprentice, let me teach you how to get along with the trams. These rail cars were manufactured in '68 and imported from Europe. At this point they're a bit rickety, but they're still in good working order because of their simple and rigid structure. They're still very reliable. Even so, there'll be times where they malfunction. In those cases, carefully check for any abnormalities in the machinery. If you look carefully and figure out the cause, you should definitely be equipped to deal with it. Malfunctions and breakdowns can be easily prevented through daily inspections and replacing the parts with no cutting corners. This old boy will buckle if you leave it unattended for more than 2 days. When it comes to replacing, if you can't get the genuine products, pick some appropriate close enough replacement parts. Even a drop of oil must be processed to suit its intended purpose or it'll go bad. Remember this, Kevin, a man may betray a machine, but a machine never betrays man. Well, that's definitely different to a man may betray others, but a machine won't.
You're one of the survivors from the rescue team, right? I just ran into your teammate, Carlos.
How did a girl like you manage to survive?
Hey, I'm no ordinary civvy. I'm a member of STARS.
Stars? You mean the RPD Special Force Team?
Hey, is someone wounded back there?
So I think the reason why Nikolai is pondering that is because he's kinda aware that Nemesis is around. I'd have to see real quick. So Nikolai's full name is Nikolai Zinoviev. So I don't know if at this point in time Nikolai is aware of Nemesis. So apparently Umbrella continued their own investigation into the mansion incident, having sealed off the blast site and currently have experts combing through the remains. One of the key figures in this investigation is UBCS monitor Nikolai, who makes regular reports back to headquarters with their findings. The key concern is remnants of trace T virus still contaminating the area, and there are likely still some escaped specimens and zombies lurking in the forest zone, which is what I was saying earlier about how there were still zombies around even before September 23rd. While sifting through the rubble, investigators find the remains of the experimental animal keeper's diary, which documents his slow transgression into a zombie, having been infected immediately after the accident. The diary is preserved as evidence and will eventually end up in the hands of Oswald E. Spencer himself at his European retreat, which I believe is that file you get in the Lost in Nightmares DLC in Resident Evil 5. Okay, so it looks like Nikolai wrote a report to Umbrella, and this is found in, I think it's Resident Evil Gun Survivor or something like that. So this is dated August 5th, 1998, report from UBCS member Part 1. The biohazard that occurred at Lord Spencer's mansion and biochemical factory ended on July 25th when members of the STARS team destroyed the entire facility. As of No. I think it's August 5th. I don't know why the Resident Evil podcast team sometimes dates these files with the format of day, month, year instead of month, day, year. Yeah, so as of August 5th, 1998, there are no signs of viral leakage in the surrounding area. However, we must continue to monitor the area with extreme caution. Our secret operative, Albert Wesker, is MIA and is presumed dead. However, we have received information that Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield are preparing to report the incident to the press and their police chief. I request this matter to be addressed with the utmost urgency. UBCS Commander Nikolai Zinoviev. So he already knew about Jill on August 5th, 1998. So before the events of Resident Evil 3. Let me rewatch this cutscene again.
You're one of the survivors from the rescue team, right? I just ran into your teammate, Carlos.
How did a girl like you manage to survive?
Hey, I'm no ordinary civvy. I'm a member of STARS.
Stars? You mean the RPD Special Force Team?
Hey, is someone wounded back there?
So I don't know if Nikolai is feigning ignorance. Like, does he know who Jill is at this point in time? If he wrote this file on Jill Valentine and Chris Redfield on August 5th, 1998?
Oh, this looks bad.
They're coming. Get ready.
It is funny how they try to make green herbs seem diegetic to the universe of Resident Evil in Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 6, Resident Evil 7, Resident Evil Revelations. But sadly, we can't use a green herb or a first aid spray to help him. But Resident Evil 3 Remake, they actually show Carlos using a first aid spray on Mikhail, which was interesting. So they canonize the existence of first aid sprays to the universe of Resident Evil with that one cutscene in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and nothing like that exists here in Resident Evil 3 OG. So here's some information regarding the UBCS. So Umbrella gave the order for UBCS teams to be deployed into Raccoon City. There will be 120 operatives made up of 4 separate platoons, with each platoon further broken down into individual squads. To the world at large, their mission is to bravely rescue the stranded citizens of the town and evacuate them safely. Video cameras will be set up around town to portray these heroics that will hopefully win the corporation some public support, but unbeknownst to the UBCS mercs, Umbrella's true objective is to gather combat data from what has now become the largest civilized disaster area in history. The soldiers will be the perfect guinea pigs against the BOWs and secondary infectants they will be fighting. All members are given weak antibodies against the T-virus before being deployed. In addition, a number of monitors or observers are sent in. These operatives are under special orders to collect battle data from their comrades, recover precious samples, and destroy any evidence linking Umbrella to the biological outbreak. The monitors' identities are a strict secret and no one in the UBCS is aware of them. Each one has a secret call sign such as Bravo 16, and they are injected with stronger antibodies against the virus than their regular teammates. They are also provided with special intelligence on little-known escape routes and hidden methods of contacting outside agents to report their progress and call in extraction if necessary. They also have authorization to sacrifice their comrades if the need arises. 2 of these monitors are identified as Nikolai of Delta Platoon Bravo Squad and Tyrell of Bravo Platoon Alpha Squad. So Tyrell is a monitor in Resident Evil 3 OG? I don't think the title of monitor ever existed in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Okay, so the monitor's secret base of operations inside the hot zone will be a shack inside Raccoon Park near the cemetery, which we do go to in this game.
Fire! Fire! Stay together!
Calm down. You're safe now. Everything is gonna be okay.
So they decided to do more with Mikhail in Resident Evil 3 Remake rather than just having him go through some kind of delirious state since he's gravely injured and playing out these memories in his head. You know, it is cool how in the remakes they decided to give more characterization to these side characters. Like they gave more characterization to Marvin, they gave more characterization to Mikhail. I mean, you're only given slightly longer screen time in the remakes, but at least they do more, which is nice.
So Jill, did you decide to help us out? It looks like we're the only ones who survived. We should work together.
No, we can't trust her.
Why? But Sergeant, we need her help. Our unit's down to you, me, and Lieutenant Mikhail. That's it. And Mikhail's hurt bad. If we don't cooperate, we won't be walking away from this mission.
Fine. Then let's go over our plan. We're moving to the clock tower area, which is the designated landing zone for the extraction chopper. Once we get there and give the signal, the chopper will fly in and pull us out.
That's a lot of ground to cover. I don't think we can make it on foot.
The main problem we have is that the landing zone is cut off from here by the fire. So we have no choice but to use this cable car to navigate through it. Fortunately, we can also use it as a moving shield to get us through the worst areas.
That works for me. Good plan, sir.
Okay, people, let's get moving.
Jill, put this on.
Okay, so they do talk about the clock tower here. Like I said, I normally don't watch the cutscenes of the older Resident Evil games. Okay, so we're gonna head to the gas station, which is yet another area that we don't really do much in aside from a minor puzzle, and we just get some oil. So I can understand why they cut it out in Resident Evil 3 Remake, or they didn't cut it out, they show it, and they just have a cutscene that occurs, and they actually use the gas to damage Nemesis by blowing up the station. I will say, playing the older Resident Evil games is certainly more satisfying than playing the older Devil May Cry games. Devil May Cry 1 was trash. Devil May Cry 2 was slightly better, but I can understand why people wouldn't really like it, because it didn't have much of a story, and some of the combat encounters did drag out. It's a fantasy game, and fantasy games are never as interesting as, you know, these science fiction-based games like Resident Evil. And Resident Evil is Capcom's greatest series because they constantly expand the universe and make it so much more interesting. Yeah, sometimes there's gunpowder on the table, but this time there isn't.
Jill. Hey, the zombies are getting restless.
I know. I can hear them. What's going on?
What do you mean, what's going on? Obviously they're closing in on you, so why are you saying what's going on? Yeah, again, like, voice acting in the older generation of gaming was bizarre because they had to place the voice files in strange ways, and they didn't actually see scenes from the game. Like, I question if these voice actors actually saw certain scenes from the game before they actually did the voice acting. I don't think they did.
Jill!
What's wrong?
They're coming! They must have sniffed us out. They know we're here.
And they all got through the
Hey,
door somehow.
calm down.
Any objections to my playing hero this time?
What are you doing? Carlos!
Okay, but this puzzle is simple. The only reason I'm really familiar with it is because I solved similar puzzles in the Evil Within, specifically the Kidman DLCs, so whichever switch you press, it not only affects the switch you press, but also the switches that are one unit away. So if I press C, it not only affects C, but it affects B and D. It's a simple puzzle, it makes sense how it works. Yeah, it's a very simple puzzle.
Carlos! No!
You're not gonna check his pulse or check if he's breathing, Jill?
Relax. I'm not dead yet.
Are you okay?
I'm fine. That hero stuff is harder than it looks.
Yeah, I will say, I just find Carlos to be a lot more interesting in Resident Evil 3 Remake.
Ouch, my ears are ringing. We both should be deaf by now. Okay, I'm gonna scrounge up some equipment. There might not be any at our destination.
Well, that is a reasonable assumption, Carlos, given that dead mercenary said that there were no provisions anywhere. But these zombies are gonna bust through the door. Yeah, so another arcadey design. Obviously, no city would be like this. You know, these arcadey designs, it just feels like an easy shortcut for developers to seemingly enrich their worlds. Like, it takes a lot more skill to make a normal environment so much fun to traverse, rather than putting these kinds of arcadey designs with puzzles everywhere.
No!
Also, if you notice, there's not a lot of music playing right now, and I don't know why people get so miffed when they play a survival horror game that has no music in certain parts. When a survival horror game is not using music in certain parts, that's the developers trusting their atmosphere and environmental sound effects to set the scene for the player. You know, good survival horror games have great music, but more masterful ones know how to deliver a survival horror experience without needing to use music. And even in non-survival horror-based media, you don't need to have music for everything. Like, look at a show like The Pit, for instance. I don't know if you guys have heard of The Pit. It's that most recent medically accurate drama. They barely have any music, and yet you can feel the tension in the air and you can connect well with the characters and what's happening. You don't need music to tell you how you need to feel in the moment, and that's what one of the developers of The Pit said. They're not trying to guide the viewer to feel a certain way. They're letting the experience stand on its own. And I understand the value of music in media, as music is often needed to make the audience feel things that they would only feel if they were directly in that visceral situation themselves, given the complexity involved with the emotional processes of the body, but you don't always need music. Look at like the Bourne Ultimatum, for instance. The fight between Bourne and Desh, there's no music playing. You're just hearing the sound effects playing out. You can hear them breathing. You can hear the sense of exasperation as they're fighting each other. It's just so interesting hearing the breathing, and you don't often hear breathing with that much clarity in media, but the fact that they don't have the music playing, you can just hear their breathing, you can hear their grunting and all the other like actions they're doing as they're fighting each other. It keeps you invested in the experience. So it's nonsensical to judge media based on the frequency of music and also say that a game is bad because of the lack of music. It's just really like ignorant to say that. You've got to widen your perspectives. You can't just be in like that rigid perspective all the time. And I know that there might be like bad media that you've listened to where they've gone outside of that rigid perspective you favored and they've been bad because of it, but you got to have more nuance in that. That's why nuance is a term. Like I said, good survival horror games may have great music, but masterful survival horror games know how to deliver a survival horror experience without having to rely upon music. So really, this whole idea of music dictating whether a game is good or not is not a perspective to favor. It's not realistic in the slightest. It's only like good or better. It's not like good or bad, it's good or better. That's like the distinction you gotta make there. It's basically a process where you set a baseline, and if anything's at the baseline, it's good, but if it's above the baseline, it's better. So if you use that sort of perspective when talking about the idea of music in games, you can be satisfied on both fronts. And that's around a subjective topic like music, but when you're talking about objective designs, like with whether a game is fully functional or not, you have to favor that perspective of good versus bad. But in the context of music, music is an artistic choice that has nuance to it. Aside from moments where they're objectively bad, like with the soundtrack for the director's cut version of Resident Evil 1 OG. I mean, who can forget just how bad the basement theme was for the director's cut version of Resident Evil 1 OG? But regardless, I shouldn't need to explain this mindset at all. This is what I don't understand when people make these kinds of silly claims. Oh, there's no music playing, so it's automatically bad. Really? You're not going to appreciate the other aspects as well? I mean, where's your balance there? That just doesn't make sense. Also, now that these dogs are gone, I can gain access to the gunpowder bee that's on this dead body. Also, this area is pretty dumb. Like, you see this manhole cover that I'm standing above? You can access that manhole cover if you do the live selection where in this previous room right over here, you choose to climb down, but why would you do that? It's yet again another example of a really stupid live selection that just has no purpose. And it's totally understandable why Resident Evil 3 Remake cut out the live selections. And you'll notice the drain demos look different now, so I think previously I got brain suckers, but this time I got drain demos. I assume I'm assigning the right name correctly. So the dogs despawn once you get the hose. Got these new features added with Resident Evil 2 and 3 OG remastered, if we want to call them that. They make doing these live playthroughs so much more fun, and a lot more streamlined, and better designed.
Wait!
So I think that was Murphy he shot right there. You know, for the longest time, I didn't even know Murphy was a character. I assumed Murphy was just a character added in Resident Evil 3 Remake, but he actually appears here. And, you know, some retard heard what I said about Murphy in a comment in my Resident Evil 3 Remake playthrough, and he's like, What right have you to judge Resident Evil 3 OG when you don't even know about a character named Murphy? Wow. He's getting triggered over an insubstantial character like this. And I know, like, Murphy can at times be killed by Carlos, and there's that moment there, but it's not like that whole moment really changes Carlos's character. Carlos is still the same character, regardless of whether you see him kill Murphy or not. It's just such an insignificant thing to say. Like, the fact that he's just assigning that much importance to a side character like this. So apparently, if you miss this one side character, you automatically don't know how to judge Resident Evil 3 OG. What a fucking retard that guy was. That has to be one of the stupidest statements I have ever heard. It's almost about as stupid as some other idiot who heard my comment where I said, you can't judge games based on the first playthrough because he didn't understand the nuance to what I said. Obviously, when you realize how sections are supposed to be played, how story moments are, it invalidates what you said in your first playthrough, but that moron was like, that's one of the stupidest statements I've ever heard. Just the level of retardation I hear from these individuals when they're making the most mind-boggling statements. It's what I constantly have to deal with these individuals, and also what I constantly have to deal with from people who clearly didn't watch my Resident Evil 4 remake retrospective. You know, that's one of the great things about making a 17-hour video, because I can easily tell if someone hasn't watched the video, and so therefore they are immediately invalidated in whatever dumb thing they say. Like, do you know the amount of people that comment on my Resident Evil 4 remake retrospective and say that my video is nothing but a rage bait video? Or they say I'm whining and complaining, or that I'm not actually criticizing Resident Evil 4 OG when I clearly criticize certain elements of Resident Evil 4 OG? I mean, you can clearly tell these people didn't watch the video, they didn't read the description of the video, and they didn't even look at the timestamps I listed in the comment section of the video to clearly understand the points I was addressing in the retrospective. They just heard the first couple of minutes of my retrospective and immediately assumed they knew the full content of the retrospective, when that intro to my Resident Evil 4 remake retrospective was a bait and lure to actually draw out the true character of these individuals and therefore see if they were commenting in good faith or not. And I say this like I purposely did that, but I didn't. I did not mean for that intro to my Resident Evil 4 remake retrospective to serve as such a bait and lure to draw out the true character of these individuals. But all I'll say is that these people have brain rot up the ass with the kinds of retarded, uneducated comments they leave behind with absolutely no substantiation behind their claims. I wouldn't be surprised if these individuals were among the 54% of American adults that read at or below the 6th grade level. And this is actually a real statistic that they found when they reviewed the US education system in September of 2020. This is actually a real value, guys. Can you believe it? I feel bad for the Resident Evil developers that slot so much time into detailing so many parts of the Resident Evil universe through a manner on par with a scholarly research team if their audience can't comprehend such detail.
What did you do?
I had no choice. He was about to turn into a zombie. It would have been a threat, so I eliminated it.
But he was still conscious, wasn't he?
Oh, come on, Jill. I mean, you saw Forrest turn into a zombie when he was bitten, and also Richard. I mean, I don't know if Richard would have turned into a zombie if he was bitten by Jan, but Jan was infected with the T-virus. But regardless, Jill has been conducting investigations into the T-virus. You should be well aware that even if you're conscious, you still turn into a zombie if you're infected with the T-virus. There's no reason for Jill to be making this statement unless this is somehow meant to tie into the confusion involved with how Jill is somehow not a zombie despite being infected in September 29th, and she's still not a zombie by October 1st. If that's an intended connection, that's pretty bizarre, and I can't tell if she's saying this line to express a sense of denial. And to relate this to another tangent, this game doesn't really show a Jill Valentine that has had nightmares about the mansion incident prior to the events that occur in this game. At least they touched upon that in Resident Evil 3 Remake, but it didn't really serve much of a purpose anyway. That's just the result of fan perception. You know, they can't really be showing Jill reflecting on the mansion incident like it was just a bunch of nightmares and, you know, the traumas of that incident, because they want to have a protagonist whom fans will identify as cool. That's why Jill is written the way she is in Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 3 Remake. It's for behind-the-scenes reasons, basically. That's why Jill is written the way she is with some of the dialogue that she says.
He was as good as dead. And it took fewer bullets to kill him now than it would have if he had transformed.
At least there's no silly comment from Nikolai where he says, "Are all STARS members this soft?" I just found that to be one of the strangest choices with a change to Nikolai's character. Why would he be saying all these things to Jill? Why mock her for these kinds of things? And it's just really stupid how in Resident Evil Death Island, Dylan did the same thing with Jill. And he's like, "And finally, we come to Jill Valentine. You could shoot Claire right now and save a life, but you hesitate. I get she's a friend and all, but still, I thought you wanted to protect the innocent. That's hard to do when you let your emotions get in the way, isn't it? I don't know why they did that with Dylan's character in Resident Evil Death Island. Eventually, I'm going to be doing a retrospective / review of the animated movies, and Resident Evil Death Island is the weakest animated movie. The amount of missed potential with that movie is just astounding, and the way they portray certain characters is a bit odd. I mean, at least with the way they portrayed Leon, he felt more like Leon than with Resident Evil 4 Remake Leon. And to have Matt Mercer return as the character of Leon was great. Aside from those moments, Resident Evil Dead Island is a weak animated film, and it doesn't have the same level of direction and intelligence as the first 3 animated movies. Okay, but the code here, most of the time it's Safsprin. It can also be Aquacure, and it can also be Adravil. Yep, it's Adravil. But also, this is a big problem right here. You see these 2 valves. This is a great example of how the auto-aim when you're aiming onto objects is pretty poor with its designs. Because at times, Jill doesn't prioritize the right thing. She oftentimes prioritizes the furthest object. And the cutscene that plays with the zombies, it only occurs when she's standing right here. But you have to get close to this valve in order to actually lock onto it properly. And you can't swap between the targets. Like, I'm mashing L1 right now as I'm holding R2, and she will not swap to the other valve. So how did they forget to put a target lock function with locking onto objects? They didn't forget this with locking onto enemies, but with objects they did, though. Bizarre. Well, so this is a weird bug. I don't know why, but there are times when you're getting this black screen for a longer duration when you're trying to pick up objects. It's a problem unique to Resident Evil 3 OG. I've never seen it with Resident Evil 2 OG or Resident Evil 1 OG. But I'm just gonna craft gunpowder C's. Because I need freeze rounds. I have no idea why Nikolai screams when he's alive. It's just a metagame element just to trick the player. But it is still cool that they have these environmental designs with using the environment against the enemies. That's a really cool idea. And this female zombie refuses to move. And I can't get through this stupid corner. The hitbox on the corners extends further than you think. There's like phantom corners with every corner in this game, and it's obnoxious because you get stuck on the corners all the time when you're trying to get away from enemies. Okay, but I have to turn immediately to avoid this drain demos. I can't move just yet. Yep, like that. Sometimes the drain demos very rarely will do this light speed jump attack that just grabs you instantly, and it's pretty bullshit. But Nemesis is going to appear here. I have no idea where he gets his rocket launchers from. Okay, but this part right here, you gotta run directly straight, otherwise Nemesis will hit you every single time. Okay, usually he does the melee attack there, but this time he chose not to do it. His AI is just very sporadic when he has his rocket launcher out. And after this really pointless live selection... Oh, come on, how... I've never been caught by the crow right there. So I have no idea what is causing this earthquake right now. Is it the Gravedigger? Yeah, so there's no logical reason to jump down. And you don't go anywhere, you just go into like a little sewer, and then you climb up and you're right back through that manhole from the previous room. What were they thinking with that? Is it only there to influence a cutscene you get later on? I have no idea. That was close. Oh. So because I'm on an incline, the zombies will vomit. And there are no drain demos here now. But I can at least get the gunpowder A from here. This is guaranteed every single time. Oh, shit! Well, I have no choice, I have to run. So you're either going to get dogs or crows in this part. I got crows, so I need to run this way and turn around. That crow is really on me. So they only spawn when you pick up the compass. You get the battery here, and then you have to go backwards. It's probably better to have the shotgun for this upcoming part, because of the numerous zombies you encounter. Stupid fixed camera. Still so silly, like why bother giving a character a head or eyes when they can't even see directly in front of them or to the side? It's one of the dumbest design choices with the fixed camera angle. Put this away. We'll swap pistol for the shotgun. At times you can run past the upcoming zombies when you're on the incline because they'll vomit, but there are times where you just cannot get past them if they're clustered together in a certain way. Also, I do like how in the classic games, the weapon you're holding has no impact on your sprint speed. You still sprint the same speed. I don't know why they changed it where holding two-handed weapons now decreases your speed, so it forces you to have your knife out in order to run faster. It was just such a waste of time, because of course you could already pause the game and swap weapons. It was just needlessly tedious. But either way, it didn't matter in Resident Evil 1 Remake because that entire game is just designed for knife only, and going for the weapons is a waste of time. Let me actually rewind, just to see if I can run past them, because there might be a path. Nope. Let me just try again. See, like that. But you can see how awkward that is, just trying to run past them. Let's just do that again. Because there's no telling how the zombies will cluster. And here's another stupid live selection moment. So, when you go into one of the doors that you open using the control system, a bunch of zombies will start shaking the door. But you'd assume it's the zombies from previously, but it's not. They're just a bunch of zombies that spawn out of nowhere. So the code should be red, blue, blue, blue for this door, but then the second door, which is where the grenade launcher is, or like the random weapon that's either the grenade launcher or the magnum, it's red, 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 blue. Yeah, so now the zombies have spawned, and then we get this live selection moment that isn't even worth, like, watching. You either go to the emergency exit or you increase the electricity output, but there's really no, like, consequence to this. You don't get rid of the zombies outside the station, you just kill these random zombies that come out of nowhere. It's a really pointless live selection moment. I mean, I know a lot of the speedrunners will just head to the emergency exit, but they'll oh. Okay, well these zombies spawned in. They're usually easy to get past. And if you head to the emergency exit, I'm positive those zombies will still be there. And let me actually see real quick. So you head to the emergency exit, and I'm positive the zombies are going to be there. Yeah, see? So, like, what's the point? Why head to the emergency exit when you get the same outcome as increasing the electricity output? You know, a lot of these live selections really feel like last-minute decisions, because they really don't make any logical sense with their placement. I mean, I know there's a moment where if you go to this substation at a certain point and you head to the emergency exit, rocket launcher Nemesis will spawn and he will kill the zombies, but I don't really see the incentive to go to the substation at an earlier point. Yeah, you can just pick up the pistol bullets on the way out, but I unfortunately have low space. As long as I have that lone gunpowder B, I'm fine. But now that I have everything, I can just head back to the tram right now. But yeah, this game is a lot of fun. I really enjoy it. More so than Resident Evil 2 OG. Like, I still stand by that Resident Evil 2 OG is pretty overrated, but Resident Evil 3 OG really deserves a lot of the praise it's received, even if there are some pretty pointless mechanics. Getting past Nemesis here is simple. 1, 2, 3. I don't know why he's just there, but this is where the Gravedigger will come in. Isn't it funny how it's this Lonsdale yard and Morgan Lansdale is a character in Resident Evil Revelations? I can't help but feel like they came up with the name because they looked back at Resident Evil 3 OG. It's like, people assuming that Ethan Winters got his name because somebody looked back at Resident Evil 5's files and they saw Ethan W. And so they came up with this funny theory that Ethan Winters was a former Umbrella researcher. Okay. God damn, you see that fucking bullshit with the invisible corner? I fucking hate that so much about the classic games. It's a problem with these fixed camera-based games as well when they have all these stupid invisible corners everywhere. But we can now make our way over to the clock tower. That's everything.
It looks like we're ready to go. Here, take this.
Yeah, he gives you flame rounds here.
Okay. Nikolai won't be joining us.
I understand. I'll operate the cable car. Let's go.
So when does Jill actually talk about Murphy with Carlos? I don't think it matters so much.
It's looking good.
And Nemesis somehow gets on the tram. In Resident Evil 3 Remake, it didn't really make sense how Nemesis got on the train when the train was underground. But maybe he jumped from a rooftop somewhere.
Mikhail!
You know, I still remember Ioma-san's funny reaction when he was asked, how exactly does Nemesis know where Jill is at all times? And he said that Nemesis's blood would boil every time he was near Jill, which is how he knew exactly where she was.
Mikhail!
Jill, get out of the cable car now!
Mikhail, wait, don't!
Get out of here! Hurry!
Yeah, so he somehow recovered very easily, and he's no longer having those delirium moments. So I guess that's why they decided to make him fully conscious at the start of Resident Evil 3 Remake in order to justify how he's active right now. Oh, he's not even bleeding in this cutscene. Where's his wounds? I have no idea what he said right there because the audio balancing in these older Resident Evil titles is pretty poor. Did he say adios? I have no idea what he said.
Mikhail.
No, the brakes are out.
And just jump out the window. There is no incentive to use the emergency brake.
It's useless.
And what even happens to Carlos here? How does he survive? And plus, when you jump out the window, you get free freeze rounds from Carlos. Look at that. All the gunpowder's right there. So I'll just grab the red one. This gunpowder B will also be useful if I need to craft acid rounds for the Gravedigger. Okay, but I need to make sure I have some slots open because he won't give the freeze rounds otherwise. Don't really need that. I need the Magnum. Just take that. I shouldn't combine this yet because I might not get grenade rounds. If I don't get grenade rounds, then the CCC combination will not allow me to get freeze rounds. I can only get freeze rounds without the grenade rounds if I just put the CC combination into the crafting tool, and I don't need the incendiary rounds yet. I'll put this in here for the time being. I'll put this in here as well. Am I still able to recover the rest of the gunpowders? Are the zombies placed far enough away? Yeah, this is fine. Or not. Yeah, and I have plenty of opportunities to craft gunpowder Cs. Okay, so I was just looking over the Resident Evil podcast team's timeline, and they mentioned that Murphy was infected with the T-virus after he drank contaminated water and was on the verge of changing. And also, apparently back in that room where Murphy died, there's a file that says purchase order, specified medicinal solution VTJ98, suited to incubation of NET model test subjects. Plan to order undiluted solution as needed. UE 6th laboratory. Anyway, let's move on.
Carlos!
Phew. Well, we both managed to survive. Maybe we can start helping each other again.
Yeah, it's been rough. But we can rest now.
No, we're the only ones left. There's no rest for the wicked. Here's a gift for you.
Huh, so when you use the emergency brake on the tram, Carlos is more despondent, and Jill slaps him in the face. But here he's more upbeat. Okay, so now that I have the freeze rounds, I can swap them out with the grenades currently in my grenade launcher, and then combine the gunpowder CCC with the grenade rounds to get more freeze rounds. At least when a character gives Jill something, it's actually meaningful compared to Resident Evil 1. Because you could do Resident Evil 1 and Resident Evil 1 Remake with only the knife, unfortunately. So we'll combine this, and combine that. There we go, now I have 24 freeze rounds. Awesome. I should also take the time to add these as well. Okay, so combining this mixture, I can get more freeze rounds if I apply the crafting tool here. There we go, now I have 34. Freeze rounds are mandatory for Nemesis, because Nemesis can be badly designed. Yeah, just make sure you have the Magnum and the grenade launcher in your inventory while you're doing this clock tower sequence. Well, also, when you pick up the mine launcher here, there's another file. Or the mine thrower. The mine thrower is a useless weapon. There's no reason to use it. Operation Instruction. I think this is another opportunity for me to see if the Japanese version is different. UBCS Echo Team. Echo Team's primary objective is to sweep the city area and evacuate surviving civilians to inside the clock tower. Prioritize the rescue of civilians employed by Umbrella affiliates, including reward, or as the English localization says, among the civilians, remember to give priority to the employees of Umbrella's affiliates. So relating back to what Resident Evil Death Island said, orders are to assist with the evacuation of Umbrella Corp execs and government officials only. I mean, that was with Dylan's group, but he was not part of the UBCS. This is similar to what the UBCS is doing, it seems. But the UBCS is also giving priority to employees of Umbrella's affiliates. The living corpses, beings we call zombies after death via infection, are highly durable and difficult to put out of commission. Be on full alert. Evacuating operation area. Step 1. Evacuate upon completing the operation or if continuing the mission becomes impossible. Step 2. Guide the large helicopter on standby in the outskirts to the garden in front of the clock tower. Step 3. Consider the clock tower bell as a signal of the end of the operation or to communicate failure of the operation to all units in the city. Seems odd to use a clock tower. They don't have like a radio signal or something. And would they really take Jill in? What if some of the UBCS members are familiar with Jill even if they are mercenaries? What if like some monitors are part of the operation? Whoa. The movement kind of screwed me right there. You'll either get zombies or drain demos in that room. Always crawling zombies. This is another place that can have gunpowder as well. And I don't know why I have the mine thrower in my inventory. I need to get rid of it. The mine thrower is garbage because you fire it into an enemy and it has a set charge before it detonates and it can be a bit too long. And the damage is pretty pitiful as well. Yeah, Jill faces weirdly. You have to turn left and then run. I will say, this whole idea of the UBCS using a clock tower in Raccoon City to signal the end of the operation feels reminiscent to what Wesker did in Resident Evil 4 Remake, where for some reason he had to use the Illuminados' highly sensitive antenna array in order to detonate his bombs. And I question the logic behind that. What if the Illuminados didn't have the highly sensitive antenna array? How could he have possibly detonated his bombs? And similarly, if the clock tower wasn't around in Raccoon City, how would the UBCS signal the end of the operation? And furthermore, the monitors have that shack that's in the park area, and they were clearly using it to communicate with HQ, so why would they need to use the clock tower when the monitors already have access to that kind of station to communicate with HQ? It doesn't really make sense. I understand that the monitor's secret operations were unknown to the UBCS, but surely a form of communication should have been uniform between the monitors and the regular UBCS members. If the monitors could gain access to such a station, then surely the regular UBCS members could do the same, right? Also, this music box puzzle, Capcom apparently provided the solution to this puzzle somewhere in the clock tower because there were people who were tone deaf and they couldn't actually identify if the melody was correct or not. I don't know if that's only in certain versions or if it is something actually present on the launch version of Resident Evil 3 OG. Another bizarre puzzle. I don't know why they have to offer these arcadey puzzles to delay the inevitable. And I know Ioma-san said that one of the reasons they favored random puzzle solutions is to increase the length of the game because Resident Evil 3 OG is a short game. But still though, puzzles, I mean, I'll never understand why these puzzles are synonymous with classic survival horror. There's nothing scary here. It's just very arcadey design just to delay you, or is it just some way of diversifying the gameplay so that you don't get so fatigued from running past enemies or shooting them? But that's what the cutscenes and the set pieces with bosses are for. So why have these kinds of puzzles? It doesn't really make sense. This is precisely why Resident Evil 3 Remake didn't have these kinds of puzzles. They only had like 2 puzzles and that was it. Because they didn't want to waste the player's time. And I know I'm going to hear someone say, oh, if they didn't want to waste the player's time, why did they have you go through those interactive cutscene moments at the start of the game? Just completely unrelated and not a good argument at all. And plus, you just make a save after that kind of moment. You know, I forgot to mention how, like, you know that jewel puzzle we did back in Raccoon City? I'm glad they made that an optional thing in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and they used it as a way to give the players supplies if they actually found the jewels. That's a better implementation of that kind of system. And Nemesis appears here, but we can just push him off. There's no incentive to use the cord against him, because he'll just get up immediately and start attacking you. The only reason you want to use the cord against him is if you're trying to get some supplies from him, but I think he only drops like first aid sprays in this part. But there's Dario's daughter in that corner with that UBCS guy. So there's like 6 different solutions for this one depending on your starting time. It's a bizarre puzzle. It's just memorize whatever is the correct solution, and that's how you get your puzzle solutions on certain websites. So in this case, I have 11 o'clock, so the code is Amber Obsidian Crystal. Again, more arcadey designs to make this clock tower seem more extravagant than it actually is. It's a cheap shortcut in environmental designs, I have to say. I mean, while it can be appealing sometimes, it takes a lot more skill to make a regular environment feel much more interesting. And I made a mistake, but luckily for me that Spire didn't attack me. You're supposed to turn to the right rather than running and turning to the right, and then you have to run. Also, I do find this a bit strange. I don't really see how this is a beautifully ornamented gadget. It looks so basic. It's a very odd choice of text. And I find it hard to believe that people believed that they would actually end the game right here. But why would they assume that the game would end right here when Nemesis is still alive? You know, I'll never understand why these people think this. I mean, the game is literally called Resident Evil 3 Nemesis. Why would they assume that the game would end right here when Nemesis is still alive? Like, why would people assume they'd be leaving after doing the basic stuff that they've been doing in the clock tower? It just doesn't really make sense for people to think like that when it comes to the ending of this game, and people assume this was the ending of the game before Nemesis shot down the helicopter. It really doesn't make any sense, and it's pretty silly.
You're saved. Down here!
And plus, this is a UBCS chopper. Why would Jill just assume that they would accept her?
It's finally over. Huh?
Yeah, it's so dumb. And it seems Nemesis is keen on eliminating UBCS members as well. I mean, he was attacking Carlos as well, so I guess Nemesis was programmed to attack such individuals.
No!
And she's infected. This is me from the future talking, so I just want to say that maybe I was a bit too harsh on Clock Tower Nemesis in that one video when I said he was one of the worst bosses ever made in the entire Resident Evil series. I will admit that when you're ignoring the damage Nemesis is doing to you and using the freeze rounds against him to finish him off quickly, it's a good encounter. It's also cool using the freeze rounds to make him miss with the rocket launcher, so this is pretty much an encounter that demands you brute force him with the freeze rounds, which is fine when you account for the careful crafting of freeze rounds prior to this encounter and some of the awkwardness involved with Resident Evil 3 OG's gameplay. But the dodge problems, the poor arena designs, and the confusion regarding what the developers considered as the normal approach to this encounter should still be called out. It just feels like you have to bitterly accept the problems with this encounter and just take him down with the freeze rounds, whereas with Flamethrower Nemesis from Resident Evil 3 Remake, you could incapacitate him in almost the same amount of time as this encounter here, but you at least used your tools intelligently to take him down without taking any damage. There were never any poor designs present with that particular encounter. So basically what I'm saying is this Clock Tower Nemesis encounter could have been handled better. I'm also not sure if Jill is fully healed when you play as her after Carlos' section. Having said all that, I'll still show what the original recording of this part of the playthrough was like. Also, the method I described in that one video I did with Clock Tower Nemesis, where I hold R1 and X during this little cutscene where he's walking towards Jill, and that gets him to fire 3 times. That doesn't actually work. I just got lucky in that recording, and it was just happening every single time I was restarting. So it's random what Nemesis does right here. And she didn't even aim properly onto Nemesis. What the hell was that about? She wasn't hitting him. The auto aim completely messed with me there, which is something that never happened before. Like, she's not aiming at Nemesis properly. What's going on? I have to skip the cutscene. Maybe then she'll lock on. No, she's still not aiming correctly. I don't know what's going on. This has never happened to me before. See, why is she doing this? Why is the auto-aim failing me? Well, whatever. I always take one hit because this fight is so badly designed. In fact, let me actually just show you how bad the dodge system is and just how bad this environment is. Again, fails me right there. Stupid dodge system. Again, Jill, why are you being so stupid? Doing multiple dodges for the same... Again, I got hit while dodging! So stupid. Again, so fucking dumb! Who's the dumbass that thought it was a good idea to give Jill multiple different dodge animations for one single attack? And trying to get distance from Nemesis is really stupid because he runs so fast. And then when you dodge those kinds of attacks, you just don't have time to get away. God, fucking Jill every time. And then she decided to aim at the end of the dodge animation, so it swallowed my quick turn input, and I got hit so easily. Again, fucking hell, Jill! The worst dodge system ever! And she crouched that time, but... Or did she? I have no idea. Again, stupid fucking dodge system. Again? Oh my god! And the worst part is, Nemesis doesn't flinch when he's doing attack animations, or when he's roaring, or when he's, like, prepping his rocket launcher. What a joke. I mean, even with the freeze rounds, this is not gonna help me one bit. And, see, no flinch animation, simply because he went into an attack animation. And he dodges your grenade shots as well, because he recognizes the size of the projectile, so that's why he dodges. That's what Ayuma-san reasoned. And I got caught in the corner. Like, every time with Jill's dodge animation, she puts you in a bad spot. And of course, she did the crouch animation, she didn't back up, so of course Nemesis is going to do an attack animation and completely bypass the flinch animation. And he decided to do that. It's just so much more efficient damage raising him with the freeze rounds when he has his rocket launcher out, because at least he stands still when he's firing his rocket launcher, and I can always make him miss with the rocket launcher so long as he doesn't rush towards me out of nowhere. Like, she spends so much time just putting the grenade into the grenade launcher, so I have to sit through that recovery period before I'm able to run. I can't even turn while she's busy, like, putting the grenade in. She stays in that one direction. And he decided to sprint right there and bypass the stun. It's completely random what he does, and he takes advantage of so many poor designs, and the room is not designed well enough to allow you to put distance between yourself and him. And why isn't he flinching right now? He's in a neutral animation, and he's not flinching. Hitting me while dodging again with phantom range. And there's no telling what dodge animation Jill does. And he ignored... Look at that! She even did the sound of ever dodging, and he still grabbed me before she even did the dodge animation. It's such a stupid boss fight, but you have to just spam him with freeze rounds and just take the hits. Or just use the exploit area to not take any damage. those slow hits are annoying to dodge, and even if you do dodge, he just hits you all the time. Like, the slow hits I can understand for making you mistime your dodge, that I understand, but not the part where you get hit while dodging. Again, oh my fucking god, Jill! Again, no flinch animation because he went into an attack animation. He just chose to do the attack animation instead of going back into a neutral state. It's just such a brain-dead encounter. And the only way you can mitigate these issues is to use the exploit areas, with getting him stuck on corners, and again, the stupid dodge animation failed me. I don't understand why people say they never have issues with the dodge system when they're using it against Nemesis. How can they say that after all the footage they've seen so far? Same thing with the fucking dodge screwing me. It's just such a dumb boss fight. It's one of the worst bosses in the entire Resident Evil series. There's nothing epic about it. Oh, Jill is struggling to survive because she has the virus within her. Well, that's to be complemented by a decent boss fight. I mean, Ethan Winters was fighting for his life against Evelyn. She was pounding him to death. He was on the verge of dying, for crying out loud, but it was complemented by good music, and it's not a boss fight, it's a cinematic moment, but it's a really cool cinematic moment, and plus, when Chris was witnessing Ethan struggling to survive, he was reminded of the mansion incident, as highlighted in a Tokyo Marui article on the Albert 01 pistol. There's just nothing epic here, it's just very basic gameplay, not even basic, it's downright alpha gameplay, with the shit dodge system, and with the way Nemesis cancels his attacks, and blatantly ignores the flinch animations, and you're in a terribly designed room that is not befitting for the systems at play. And she decided to dodge right there. She did the roll. I don't know what causes her to do the roll. The roll is completely random, and it can often get you screwed. Also, if you have your pistol out when you're doing that move, she actually stays on the ground and you can fire so long as you're holding the aiming button. And at times, Nemesis will miss you with hits, but if he does the downward strikes, he will hit you every time. Or if he decides to hit you with a bad hitbox. But why is it so random how she rolls on the ground? And it puts you into a bad position sometimes when you're trying to get out of corners. It's just an idiotic boss fight mitigated by the high damage you're dealing with the freeze rounds while also taking a hit here and there. Or by using the exploit areas where you get Nemesis caught on a corner. It's just seriously brain dead. Let me just take him down seriously. But I need to go this way. And he's done, and I was very fortunate that he decided to prep his rocket launcher instead of running at me with a running attack. Let me just do him again. Yeah, just beat them down. I mean, it's so idiotic. Like, at least in Resident Evil Code Veronica X, you could use those BOW gas grenades. Like, the reason why those BOW gas grenades are there is specifically for the Tyrant on the plane. So you use your 3 BOW gas grenades and knock him back with the cargo, and he's already in the weakened state where he can't do his running attacks on you. He's just limping towards you. So by then, you've already won the fight. Then it was just a matter of waiting for the cargo to recharge, and then you can just kill him. That's at least using your resources intelligently. As long as you experiment with the BOW gas grenades, you're well aware that the plane Tyrant is heavily vulnerable to the BOW gas grenades. But here, you just kind of have to assume that the freeze rounds do a lot of damage. It's after like 5 freeze rounds that he goes down, so that then gets it into your head that he's vulnerable to the freeze rounds. There's no obvious signs that he's vulnerable to the freeze rounds. But even then, he just hits you so easily with the way the poor designs are against you. Lucky me. But if you decided to engage the emergency brake on the train, you won't fight Rocket Launcher Nemesis, you'll fight Tentacle Nemesis, but Tentacle Nemesis is annoying compared to the Rocket Launcher Nemesis, and Rocket Launcher Nemesis at least gives openings for you to use the freeze rounds against him, and to at least use a cool mechanic with making him miss with his rocket launcher. And I think if you use a gun against him, you can shoot the rocket as it's coming out and it does damage to him. I'm not pretty sure if that's how it works. And at least Nikolai in Resident Evil 3 Remake documented this encounter between Jill and Nemesis at the clock tower. At least they actually go into detail about Jill's potential immunity to the virus, or like she has a greater resistance to the virus. There are multiple mentions of her resistance to the virus in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and Jill at the start of the game even made a file where she said, do certain individuals have more resistance to the virus? Is the virus in the water supply? And one of the main ways that the virus spread throughout Raccoon City, aside from the rats being infected by the T-virus, was from the Dead Factory area in Resident Evil 3 OG. The Dead Factory was releasing the contaminants into the water supply, and so people got infected. And there was also fallout from the mansion incident. That was how people were getting infected as well.
Jill! Jill! Hang in there!
But they just kind of brush off Jill's resistance, and at this point in time, it should be like September 29th when she's at the clock tower. I wonder what the Resident Evil podcast team says here. Okay, so around September 29th at midnight, that's when Jill emerges from the main hall into the courtyard, having signaled the helicopter only minutes ago. Also, apparently September 29th is the day the Michael Festival, which is in honor of Saint Michael the Archangel, which is why it's called Saint Michael's Clock Tower. That's when the festival is supposed to take place. And oh my god, I just realized something. Do you remember how in the Shadows of Rose DLC, when Rose didn't initially know who Ethan was, she gave him the name Michael because she referred to him as her guardian angel? What do you bet that was a reference to Resident Evil 3? If that's the case, that is really cool. So while Jill is unconscious, the events of Resident Evil 2 OG are happening right now. The Resident Evil podcast team says while Jill is unconscious, around pre-dawn, Leon returns to his motel somewhere near Raccoon City after leaving a party from the previous evening, and he has broken up with his girlfriend following a blazing row and is upset. Due to the ongoing emergency within Raccoon City, all Umbrella operations, equipment, and personnel are placed under control of Sergei Vladimir, who has arrived in the city to monitor the situation. He will personally take charge of a helicopter due to infiltrate Raccoon City airspace to carry out an important mission of recovering the UMF-013 mainframe computer from William Birkin's underground laboratory. He will also be using the aircraft to drop off 6 T-103 Tyrant models at various places inside the city, including one specifically programmed to seek out and recover the G-virus sample believed to be carried by Sherry Birkin. They also need to deal with US government spec ops who have taken over a key location in the P-12A incinerator facility, also known as the Dead Factory. So Leon arrives in Raccoon City around dusk. So what was Carlos doing all this time while he was in the church with Jill? Why did it take him so long to just suddenly go to the hospital that's nearby? And it's just so convenient that the hospital is right next to the clock tower.
Done. I'm sorry, Jill. Please, wake up! Jill! Jill!
October 1st, night. I woke up to the sound of falling rain. I can't believe I'm still alive.
Yeah, so what the hell was he doing on September 30th? Why did it take him so long to go to the hospital? If it's now October 1st, it doesn't make sense. At least in Resident Evil 3 Remake, Carlos goes to the hospital because Dr. Bard is there. And Dr. Bard said he had some kind of vaccine for the virus. So in Resident Evil 3 Remake, Jill was at the clock tower for like half a day. That's what the game says, roughly half a day later after Nemesis infected her with the virus. Yeah, so Dr. Bard says he was trapped in the hospital when he was having that video call with Carlos at the RPD. Bard says in this cutscene when he's talking with Carlos at the RPD that he's the only one who knows how to make the vaccine to stop the zombies. So that's precisely why Carlos goes to the hospital with Jill. So that makes a lot more sense than how it's portrayed here with Resident Evil 3 OG. It's silly. I don't understand what Carlos was doing the entire time. Even the Resident Evil podcast team isn't noting anything that happened on September 30th with Carlos. Literally, on September 29th, pre-dawn, Carlos keeps vigil over Jill, and then the next instance is literally October 1st. At the St. Michael Clock Tower in the chapel, Jill Valentine slowly wakes up after being unconscious for 2 days. It's so dumb! This is one of the dumbest parts of Resident Evil 3 OG.
Carlos?
It looks like our roles have been reversed.
I am amazed Jill can even move about after she's been lying down for 2 days. How is that possible?
From when we originally met, huh? Don't worry, Jill. This chapel is safe.
The time lapse from September 29 to October 1st. What happens in Resident Evil 3 Remake during that period? I really should look at the remake timeline that the Resident Evil podcast team made. Also, I forgot to mention that pocketbook from the guy who rescued Dario's daughter. He says in that file, I wanted to evacuate as soon as possible, but the girl didn't. Her father insisted that he wouldn't leave the city where his beloved wife rests in peace. I really wanted to save the girl, but Campbell said all I care about is our lives. That's how I felt before, but now the clock tower has become a dangerous place, and I don't want to make any more mistakes. So 4:35 a.m. on September 29th, that's when Jill regains consciousness in the subway tunnels in Resident Evil 3 Remake. And around 4:43 a.m. is when Jill contacts Carlos when she's on the bridge in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Around 7 a.m. is when Nikolai updates his log with his thoughts on Nemesis' transformation and Jill's infection. And then roughly half a day later, so around 7 p.m., is when Carlos finds Jill. That's what the Resident Evil podcast team is assuming. They also mentioned that Carlos arrived at Spencer Memorial Hospital with Jill at 9:20 p.m. And again, this is still on September 29th. It's also important to note that Dr. Bard made his final video message on September 29th, 11 p.m. before he was murdered by Nikolai. So he made that video call 2 hours after Carlos arrived at the hospital, but that doesn't make sense. It's a short distance between the makeshift sick room that Carlos put Jill in and Bard's office. Why did it take him so long to actually get to Bard? And when Carlos is unable to access Dr. Bard's office, he tries calling out to him through the intercom and he doesn't get any response, meaning that Bard was dead. So what was Carlos doing when he went from the makeshift sick room to Bard's office? And Nikolai updated his log at 4 a.m. on September 30th to say that Carlos recovered and administered the vaccine to Jill, meaning that Carlos obtained the vaccine likely around 3:30 a.m., as noted by the Resident Evil podcast team. The timing of Bard's death definitely makes certain parts confusing, but I can at least appreciate that Resident Evil 3 Remake is trying to make the events that occurred between September 29th and October 1st more logical than in Resident Evil 3 OG, where Carlos did nothing on September 29th and September 30th. That makes a lot more sense in Resident Evil 3 Remake with what Carlos was doing with actually saving Jill and giving the vaccine on September 30th and waiting, compared to what it's like here. Like, it's just so silly how they portray it in Resident Evil 3 OG. Like, what was Carlos doing before October 1st? It doesn't make sense.
Been infected by the virus, haven't I?
Hey, take it easy.
I'm okay. Don't feel any pain. But that's what bothers me. If I can't feel anything, then what does that mean?
Don't give up, Jill. I'll take care of you. Whatever you do, don't let that virus beat you.
So we're just expected to know that a hospital is nearby. It's a really confusing part of the Resident Evil 3 OG story. It makes no sense, one bit. By the way, I'm amazed these characters can survive for that long without food or water. What were they even using for water sources if the virus was inside the water supply? Oh, look at that bullshit with no flinch animations. What is going on right now? Such bullshit. This is why you just run past these drain demos, even if you take hits. But even then, it can be random with that second drain demos. Don't even, like, hit this guy. Wait for him to, like, come down. I guess what you can do is just, like, hit him when he's on the ceiling, maybe. Nope, that doesn't work. Look at the fucking bullshit these enemies are. That is so dumb. And that one died a lot faster than usual for some weird reason. Luckily, you can do this entire section with just the assault rifle, but the drain demos and the hunters are pretty broken when you're trying to use the assault rifle against them. And this is the Hunter Beta. I question why they have the boils on them, like they were underdeveloped. But these hunters are just as broken as Resident Evil Zero's hunters, where they don't flinch sometimes when they're supposed to. Like when you're playing as Jill, it's best you have the Magnum, because the Magnum instantly kills the hunters. And here's a file here. Director's Diary. September 10th. In early symptoms, they exhibit blood congestion and necrosis of the skin, periodic clouding of the mind, and by the end, they lose their capability for human reasoning. Once this happens, recovery is hopeless and even euthanasia is ineffective. No wonder, of course. Medically speaking, the patient should already be dead. It's a horrifying disease. When the patient loses their rational mind, they lash out violently like severe drug addicts and attack like starved tigers craving raw flesh. I'm surprised we're not assuming it's rabies. I mean, I know he's probably not seeing the iconic foaming of the mouth, but you'd assume it's rabies in this sense. That's at least what would come to mind in a layman's mind. September 18th, another afflicted patient was brought in today. Their initial symptoms still look mild, but I haven't slept for days. I just can't stand by and watch my patients turning into hideous monsters anymore. I'm no bystander. I'm a doctor, a healer of the people. Even if I were to succumb to it, the medical treatment records I leave behind will surely be of some use. My clinical record should reveal the root of this disease. September 26th, maintaining this hospital is no longer possible after having lost most of our staff and doctors in skirmishes with the afflicted patients. It's too late. We aren't strong enough. Not until after I realized the cause is a virus we've never seen before. We were too late in responding. It's getting tough. My mind is fading, and his writing ability is clearly compromised here, but they don't acknowledge it here. Also, this is really bizarre. I don't know why there is a random tape recorder here, and you just apply it to an elevator that's in the same room. Seems rather bizarre that it would be designed this way.
There also appears to be a slight fracture in his right arm just below the elbow. However...
So, you have multiple ways of going. You can go to 4F, you can go to B3, whichever one works for you. And you get different cutscenes as well with Tyrell, who's apparently a monitor in this game.
Don't shoot! No!
He's dead.
Nikolai? You're still alive?
You saw what happened?
What's going on?
I'm one of the supervisors. That's all you need to know.
Wait!
And he somehow survives that. That was just a very abrupt ending. You also have these photos here. What's the origin of these photos? They seem like meta-commentary from the developers, not really something diegetic to the world of Resident Evil. But in another cutscene, Tyrell says something to Carlos. I don't remember what it was. And this part here should be pretty simple. I think... Let me just see if I'm correct with this. I think the positioning of that small table, it should indicate what the code is. You don't have to check the guy's body. So I think the code is 325. First of all, I don't really understand why this kind of puzzle exists in this hospital. Why is this kind of mechanism in a hospital where it's basically you move this thing into one of the corners and it's supposed to be a mirror reflection of the room where the doctor's dead body was? So because it was in that spot, the mirror reflection is right over here. Let's see, is it 325? Yes. Okay, so the positioning of the table seems to indicate what code it is without having to check the guy's body. As I recall correctly, Umbrella didn't have the virus mass-produced at this point. They were still in the process of making it. There are still viruses out there that we don't have a vaccine for because they're very complicated to understand and they mutate constantly. But are there any files in these rooms that actually talk about the struggle that these doctors were going through? It doesn't seem like it. Because at least in Resident Evil 3 Remake, they had files that detailed the struggle the doctors were going through trying to create a vaccine. That's a different sounding zombie. Sometimes you can get hunters in this room, but it's pretty random, and here you can get hunters as well. It's also completely random whether this hunter gets around the corner or not. There's not a lot of story here, and like conveniently, Carlos finds a hospital that's making BOWs. It's just really silly how convenient this location is. It's just like in Resident Evil 2 OG, where Leon and Claire just go to the lab without even knowing it's there. They're just aimlessly going to the lab. It really makes no sense. This one is the medical device manual in the Japanese version. Umbrella Medical Equipment, North America Director Douglas Rover. To operate the synthesizer that produces the vaccine culture fluid, please perform the following items first. See to it that the synthesizer is ready to operate. Step 1. Supply sufficient electrical power. Step 2. Set cultural fluid base in device. Once the synthesizer is ready to operate, you can begin synthesizing the culture fluid. Use the 5 levers. Yeah, that's all just stuff related to the puzzle. Nothing important. If it's this easy to create a vaccine, you have to wonder why Umbrella didn't have the vaccine already mass-produced. I feel like it makes a bit more sense in Resident Evil 3 Remake how Bard was the only one who figured it out, and that's why it hasn't been mass-produced yet, and then when Jill is about to mass-produce the vaccine, it's at least cool that they implemented that as an objective in the final part of Resident Evil 3 Remake section. In the final part of Resident Evil 3 Remake, where Jill is in the process of trying to make the vaccine for mass production to prevent the T-virus. And obviously, this can't violate Resident Evil Degeneration, which is where Wolf Pharma was the first company to mass produce the T-virus vaccine, because they actually made the T-virus vaccine compared to Umbrella. And so they have it where Nikolai destroys the vaccine. So he prevented the T-virus vaccine from actually being created because he shot it in Resident Evil 3 Remake. So that's at least cool that they make the production of the vaccine a primary goal in Resident Evil 3 Remake in the final area, whereas in Resident Evil 3 OG, you just kind of go to the treatment plant out of nowhere. You don't really do anything. Yeah, I can definitely tell that Resident Evil 3 Remake story and the things you're doing in the areas makes a lot more sense than here. And just the idea that Carlos was not doing anything for a bit of September 29th and then September 30th, and then now he's doing something on October 1st, it just makes no sense. At least they changed the order of events in Resident Evil 3 Remake so that he finds Jill and takes her to the hospital and he heals her with the vaccine on September 30th. He waits for a bit because he's resting. The Defend Jill sequence happens, and then Jill regains consciousness on October 1st. This puzzle solution is always the same for some reason. It's not random. I do question how Birkin was able to create a G-virus vaccine, even though it wasn't really perfect, I would say. Yet Umbrella hadn't even created the T-virus vaccine yet. Seems a bit odd. Cultivation medium used to make vaccine. It needs to be mixed with the vaccine base to create the vaccine. Core material used to create the vaccine. Needs to be mixed with the vaccine medium. You know, they actually gave names for these components of the vaccine in Resident Evil 3 Remake. You had the antigen and the adjuvant in Resident Evil 3 Remake, the two components needed to make the vaccine, with the antigen producing an immune response, while the adjuvant increases the effects of such responses, leading to increased antibody production, rather than the basic names they gave with the vaccine base and the other one. So these are Hunter Gammas, but I think, yeah, you can capture Hunter Gammas in the park. It's fair to say that whichever Hunter Gamma model you prefer is fine. I mean, I like the Hunter Gamma design in Resident Evil 3 Remake, but I know, like, to maintain consistency, it probably makes sense to favor the Hunter Gamma model in Resident Evil 3 OG. But it was still an interesting idea with the Hunter Gammas in Resident Evil 3 Remake. Oh, shoot! That's right, I forgot about you guys. And Nikolai's planted the explosives, so we need to get out of here. You know, it's just a shame that I can list all of these things that Resident Evil 3 Remake improves upon from Resident Evil 3 OG, and yet the people who stubbornly defend Resident Evil 3 OG will never listen to what I say, and they'll still say that Resident Evil 3 OG is better than Resident Evil 3 Remake, whereas I'm making the case that they're of similar quality, but Resident Evil 3 Remake improves upon the story elements and certain pacing moments from Resident Evil 3 OG. I mean, you can like Resident Evil 3 OG, but at least take the time to acknowledge acknowledge that Resident Evil 3 Remake improved upon certain elements from Resident Evil 3 OG. It's a healthier mindset to maintain, and of course this doesn't apply to Resident Evil 4 OG versus Resident Evil 4 Remake, because Resident Evil 4 Remake is a massive insult to Resident Evil 4 OG in every respect, as I already proved in my retrospective, but I'm at least taking the time to examine any potential positives and negatives of both games, and sadly Resident Evil 4 Remake makes it so blatantly obvious how many negatives it has compared to Resident Evil 4 OG. But getting back on track, I'm at least using that same mindset of examining Resident Evil 4 OG and Resident Evil 4 Remake to better examine Resident Evil 3 OG versus Resident Evil 3 Remake. And that's a great example of liking or disliking certain aspects of Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 3 Remake in good faith. But the people who stubbornly defend Resident Evil 3 OG without acknowledging some of the positives of Resident Evil 3 Remake, or just flat out hating Resident Evil 3 Remake for petty reasons, it's never in good faith. Yeah, so I read something else on the Resident Evil podcast team's encyclopedia on Jill Valentine, but the UBCS survivors were briefed on Jill, and a large reward was available to the operative who confirmed her elimination. Yet, for some reason, Nikolai doesn't really try to eliminate her. He does try to eliminate her in the park area, and this part is random. There's no telling what enemies you'll get. Okay, lucky me, I got zombies. Sometimes you'll get those eel creatures, whatever they are, they're like leeches. No idea. But those leeches can be really annoying when they grab you. So I feel like the mutation in Resident Evil 3 Remake makes a lot more sense with, showing the uncontrollable nature to the T-Virus, because of course Nemesis was wearing a limiter coat, and he also had that device on his chest to inhibit his Any-Alpha parasite. Just looking at the Any-Alpha parasite, and also with Nemesis, Umbrella Europe began experimenting with organic parasites, and this led back to a project the European 6th Lab had been working on since 1988, the Nemesis parasite. Named after the Greek goddess of revenge, Nemesis was a suitable name to motivate the European branch to create a weapon capable of hunting down and defeating the very people who had defeated the American-made Tyrant at the Mansion. It was all part of an intense power struggle brewing between the US and European branches of Umbrella following that incident at the Arklay Mountains. Okay, so the Any-Alpha parasite had been in development for 10 years, and an early prototype was injected into Lisa Trevor in 1988, which led to the discovery of the G-Virus. However, development of the parasite was slow going, for it was so powerful it killed all of its hosts within 5 minutes of insertion. Lisa Trevor was the only subject who survived thanks to her unusual survival ability from numerous experiments with the progenitor virus, but following a decade of refinement, the parasite was now more or less perfected. Any-Alpha was implanted into the spinal cord of a mass-produced T-103 at a cellular level. So Nemesis is a T-103 tyrant with the Any-Alpha parasite implanted into his spinal cord. Over time, the parasite would absorb the T-virus cells within the body and grow, spreading throughout the tyrant's entire system and eventually forming a unique brain near the medulla oblongata. At the same time, it eroded the central nervous system and destroyed the host's frontal lobe, modifying the neural network to link its own brain with the remaining brain functions of the host. Once this was complete, the tyrant's entire thought process would be left in the hands of the Nemesis, and its actions could be controlled completely from the outside. Whilst the Any-Alpha parasite on its own wasn't overly intelligent, it had the ability to boost its intellect by simultaneously using its own brain as well as the host brain. The parasite also secreted a cell activation composition which transformed the human-esque tyrant into something more akin to a monster with a unique and creepy appearance. For part of the cultivation process, a special compound known as VTJ98 was required and was speculated to be a stabilizing agent. The newfound intelligence levels of Nemesis allowed the subject to make its own decisions without the need for constant direction and be trained to operate complex weaponry, a concept that was impossible before. It really doesn't feel like it's making its own decisions here. It feels like it's acting out a biological imprint protocol, which is why it's so relentless with taking down Jill. I mean, Nemesis has been inactive since September 29th, and he's just now back, and he's searching for Jill. He's even attacking a UBCS member. Although Carlos did attack Nemesis back at the restaurant, to protect it from harm, the Nemesis T-Type was also equipped with a specially made artificial power limiter similar to that worn by the T-103s. This was in the form of a highly durable protective coat that was both bulletproof and blast-proof. In addition, it also acted as a kind behind a straitjacket as a failsafe to prevent the Nemesis from going out of control. Thanks to the unique secretions of the parasite, the Nemesis had regenerative abilities far beyond that of any other BOW or Tyrant. These same secretions are what altered the body composition to give the creature such a unique look. However, injuries or damage that require regeneration came at a heavy price, resulting in strange and awkward-looking mutations in its body. To aid its regenerative capabilities, the Nemesis, in its weakened state, would feed on other creatures infected with the T-virus, allowing the parasite access to a fresh supply of T-virus cells to absorb and grow, which is what we see Nemesis doing in his final boss fight when he eats that Tyrant. So Nemesis's regeneration seems to be tied to the Any-Alpha parasite, and this seems to be different to what happened with Simmons, where his C-virus allowed him to absorb other zombies to regrow his limbs when he became that amalgamation of multiple insect species. And also in Resident Evil The Dark Side Chronicles, when Javier bonded with the Veronica plant, they became the V-complex, and the V-complex also had the ability to absorb other organisms to make itself grow larger. So in both of those cases, the T-Veronica component seems to be the contributing factor to the regeneration, but with Nemesis, it seems to be the Any-Alpha parasite that's contributing to the regeneration. And clearly, Nemesis' regeneration as a result of his Any-Alpha parasite is different to the regenerators from Resident Evil 4, where they regenerated due to multiple parasites being injected into the bodies. And I'm guessing the parasites involved with the regenerators' regeneration, they were developed differently than the regular plagas we see. That's the only thing I can think of with regards to the regenerators' regeneration. Several models of the Nemesis were developed at the European 6th Laboratory, and during final testing, one of the subjects gained a sense of self-awareness and attempted to escape from the facility with others. This proved beyond all doubt to the research team that the intelligence levels of the BOW had been vastly improved. Specimen TO2 was programmed with orders to eliminate all STARS members and was deployed during the Raccoon City incident. Very strange that it's called TO2, because TO2 was also the name of the enhanced T Veronica strain that Carla Redames developed in order to then combine with the G virus from Sherry Birkin to make the C virus. It's interesting. And also, the T-virus that Nemesis infected Jill with, it's a more potent variant that incubated within its own body. And although its coat was bulletproof, it could still be damaged by excessive fire, and the power limiter would engage caution mode. Although there was no significant change in appearance, this defense system allowed for the creature to use parts of its semi-visible tentacles as a weapon. When in caution mode, the tentacles produced a liquid compound which affected the nervous system of the victim, restricting their movement. So in this second form that Nemesis is demonstrating, when damaged and forced to regenerate, the Nemesis began to mutate, secreting a fluid that sped up the reaction of its cells. The tentacles, which were only partially visible in its first form, now began to develop at an alarming rate and loosened up, flowing more freely than normal. Because half its power limiter has been destroyed, the T-virus mutation is not kept fully in control, meaning the tentacles enlarge and naturally become more aggressive. The body of the creature also swelled as the parasite became larger and tried to adapt to the critical situation of its injuries. When in this form, it becomes more aggressive and boasted even greater attack capabilities than its first form. The growing tentacles also took over the creature's arms, meaning it no longer had the ability to wield its firearms. Instead, it employed its tentacles in whip-like attacks on its targets. So I can definitely understand why Resident Evil 3 Remake changed the mutation to be more bestial, because they not only wanted to showcase the T-virus mutation, but also potentially the Any-Alpha parasite's involvement with the mutation process as well. And that's also why we see that power limiter on Nemesis's chest in Resident Evil 3 Remake, because it's likely holding back the parasite. And as one of my subscribers mentioned, the device on Nemesis's chest definitely suppresses the parasite. It is located in the exact same spot from which the parasite emerges during the second and third boss fights with it in Resident Evil 3 Remake. The device was probably destroyed in the subway, hence its mutation. But my subscriber does offer this question: if the device wasn't destroyed, would Nemesis not be able to trigger its intense regeneration and therefore die? That is an interesting question that my subscriber brought up. You know, I offered the theory that maybe Nemesis's second form in Resident Evil 3 Remake is meant to mirror the way the Lickers are, where they're zombies, but the specific T-virus strain allowed them to evolve into the Lickers when they weren't dead. So I thought it was like mirroring that, but it could also be that the parasite is actually contributing to Nemesis's mutation in Resident Evil 3 Remake, which is interesting. So we see here, it seems like Nemesis's second form in Resident Evil 3 OG is more like the Tyrants when they don't have their limiter code on, like with Mr. X and Resident Evil 2 OG, but because of the Any-Alpha parasite, there's more tentacles, and Nemesis doesn't really seem to be any different with his height. And you see it's emerging from the spinal cord, which shows that the Any-Alpha parasite is on his spine. And I have no idea how Nemesis emerges from there. There's also a moment where you can get this cutscene of Nemesis trying to break through into Jill's room, and he'll actually kill Jill if you don't stop him. Thanks for the help, Carlos. And I say that sarcastically because it took him so long to even do anything.
Yes. Barely. What's going on?
No way! That monster just doesn't give up.
Wow, that is such a bad placement of that quote. All of a sudden he's like, no way! That monster doesn't give up! Why does he say no way? Like, this is a great example of how hindered the development process was with implementing voice quotes. So they just place these voice lines in weird positions.
What? I thought we killed that thing.
No.
We? You're the only one who did anything, Jill.
It's been waiting for you.
He's playing with us. Carlos, do you think that it's unstoppable?
No, I don't think so. I'm sorry, Jill, but I've got to go take care of a few things. Oh, and bad news. Nikolai is still alive.
Nikolai? Are you sure?
Yes. I don't
Wait, bad news? But Jill didn't even know that Nikolai was a traitor.
know how, but I do know that he is our enemy. Remember, don't trust him.
And Carlos just leaves for some bizarre reason. At least in Resident Evil 3 Remake, the reason why he leaves Jill behind after giving her the vaccine is because he heard Dr. Bard mention in his video log that there's a stockpile of vaccines underneath the hospital, so Carlos is trying to recover that stockpile. It's so funny how both of these rooms are loaded. So for this one time, you can actually go to 2 different rooms without a loading door in the way. It makes me wonder if this game could have actually functioned without the loading doors. Oh, nice, grenade rounds. And we can also get some more here. Sometimes you can get mine thrower rounds instead, and the mine thrower is completely useless. Can combine that. I'll make some acid rounds for the gravedigger just in case I need it. There we go. Freeze rounds I can reserve for later. Photo E. These are such pointless collectibles. I don't really understand the point of these photos. And speaking of not understanding, why exactly is Jill going into the park? What is her motivation for going there? I know the way to the hospital is blocked off and this is the only route that's accessible to her, but still though, I mean, she makes such an effort to search the area, like she's going to find something, and she conveniently stumbles upon the monitor's base, and then she finds the treatment plant. Why is the treatment plant right next to a park? I know it's considered abandoned, but why next to a park? It doesn't really make sense. Like, there's no logic to what we're doing right now. Whereas in Resident Evil 3 Remake, when Jill regains consciousness, she knows immediately that she has to create a vaccine in order to delay the missile strike and to also ensure that there's plenty of vaccine to counteract the T-virus in the future. But here, there's no logic to Jill's actions in Resident Evil 3 OG. I definitely have to commend the developers for taking a bold risk with removing areas and only focusing on the more important areas in Resident Evil 3 Remake, even if fans were going to be angered over the removals, since fans don't exactly take the time to comprehend why exactly such changes were put into the remake. But of course, this works both ways. While sometimes the changes can be beneficial, other times they can be very negative, like what I've already demonstrated with Resident Evil 4 Remake. Okay, it's dogs, so I'll just use the Magnum here. And I can get Magnum ammo back, which is nice. Orders. Supervisor Bravo 16. Number 1. Collect all intel related to the current incident, observe the UBCS, gather combat data. Number 2. Completely destroy facilities that amount to evidence, especially medical institutions, etc., that collect treatment data. So that was the hospital we were just in, as Carlos. And this point on destroying evidence was touched upon in Resident Evil 3 Remake as well, because in Bard's final video message, he says that Umbrella was trying to destroy the vaccine and also kill all the researchers in order to ensure that the world doesn't find out about their involvement with the Raccoon City incident. And Nikolai was also tasked by whatever rival company he worked for to sabotage Umbrella's attempts to destroy evidence of the outbreak to maximize the culpability of Umbrella. I mean, Nikolai wasn't really keen on following this particular order. He was only doing what he was doing in order to just get more money for himself, so he was playing both Umbrella and the rival company he was working for in order to get more money, which is why he chose to kill Bard, despite the fact that Bard was going to betray Umbrella. Step 3. Verify each test subject's mission execution execution faculties. After mission completion, evacuate immediately using the designated escape procedures. Additionally, you are strictly prohibited from rescuing anyone other than supervisors and from taking money or valuables that can be traced back to their source. So there's more magnum ammo here. What exactly is this park area? Is this just like a place for people to like walk their dogs or hang out somewhere for like picnics? Because it feels more like a zoo than an actual park. And the inclusion of a cemetery in this area also lends credence to the notion that this is not a regular public park. You can definitely tell the developers had a lot of creative liberties with designing this particular section with its nonsensical designs. You know, it is still odd. The clock tower, the hospital, the park, the treatment plant, they're all located so close to each other. That really doesn't make any sense to me. You know, there isn't really a lot of logic with some of the choices of environments and their placements. That's definitely something that Resident Evil 3 Remake rectified by having the nest facility underneath the hospital. So you can understand why Dr. Bard was holed up in the hospital, and also that he was contributing to research and the nest facility was there. But here it just doesn't really make any sense. It's another victim of the arcadey designs of these old school Resident Evil titles. I think it's definitely clear that Resident Evil 3 OG was going to be a challenge to remake, and it was not going to be a perfect recreation of everything because there was just a lot of confusion with certain story moments and also with the choices of environments and also the things that we're doing as Jill and Carlos. I mean, there's so much I've discussed in terms of confusion regarding some of the things that Resident Evil 3 OG does. I don't fault Resident Evil 3 Remake's developers one bit with the choices they had to make when remaking Resident Evil 3. It definitely doesn't help that Resident Evil 3 OG was originally a side game / guiding experience, so remaking a game that was already built on very shaky foundations was definitely going to present with challenges. And as I've already mentioned before, Resident Evil 3 OG doesn't really have much of a story, and there's not much that we can really glean as to what's canon and what's not because of the live selection system. There's also a lot of confusion with the environmental designs and other aspects as well. So again, like, how can you possibly expect a development team to perfectly recreate a game like that? It's definitely one of the main reasons why Resident Evil 3 Remake is unfairly criticized by a lot of people. Just gonna craft some more freeze rounds, or nitrogen rounds as I like to call them, because freeze rounds is just too layman for my taste. I prefer the more sophisticated terminology like with nitrogen rounds, incendiary rounds. Like, why does Jill go to this park exactly? What's her reasoning aside from it being the only way to go? It's just like what happened with Leon and Claire, where they just aimlessly go to the lab for no reason and they don't even know it exists. So what's the whole reason behind this? It's just really bizarre with the way they handle these areas, and that's why, like, I'm glad some of the areas were cut in Resident Evil 3 Remake, because a lot of them are kind of fluff in Resident Evil 3 OG, and they don't really make a lot of sense with why the characters are going to these locations. At least the areas in Resident Evil 3 Remake, the choice of them and the additions they made, they feel more streamlined in terms of a story, in terms of character motivations for going there, and with introducing new plot lines like with Dr. Bard and with the U.S. Army and the U.S. Government being involved with the production of BOWs in some way. Hell, even the railgun that you use in Resident Evil 3 Remake was designed by the U.S. military. It was designed with assistance from the military. In this case, it's called the Facts from the Directorate of Operations in the Japanese version. Raccoon City's been forsaken. The tactic of maneuvering to delay our Congress is unmistakably past its limit. All supervisors must exfil immediately. The U.S. Army will execute their op tomorrow morning. The city is guaranteed to be eradicated at dawn. The wording makes a lot more sense in the English localization, with our political maneuvering in the Senate to delay their plans are now futile. It's also cool how Resident Evil 6 made Simmons a member of the special committee that decided to bomb Raccoon City, and the same goes for Ron Davis from Resident Evil Degeneration. Supervisors report. I've observed astounding durability among the infected hosts within the city. There have been cases where even if hit in a vital point with a handgun bullet, they can survive for several days without treatment, but as expected, upon onset of the disease, or after death from the disease, the infected's mental capacity is reduced to the level of an insect. Disgust from the dead coming back to life is, however, a serious concern on the battlefield. Their applications are limited to demoralizing and disturbing hostiles, for example, injecting POWs with a virus and allowing them to escape. One must wonder what would happen if the returned POWs were to turn into monsters, or BOWs in this case, or irregular mutants. The effectiveness of this would be extremely high, which is a very interesting point. And this idea of demoralizing and disturbing hostiles was also something employed by Javier Hidalgo when he used his zombies as propagators of terror against insurgents. And this idea of POWs is also talked about in Resident Evil 7 with the Mutomycete, because the E-type Mutomycete would effectively eliminate the need for POW costs. Like costs incurred from having to hold POWs, because the E-type Mutomycete would turn them into allies. Intensely contaminated areas seem to often yield mutations in animals and plants. Even though they arose accidentally, they could prove to be profitable samples for biological weapons development. Of course, I can't bring back such things. Although the existence of a giant alligator had been reported earlier, the giant alligator being from Resident Evil 2 OG, I've risked my life facing a fearsomely large creature burrowing in the soil. I don't want to imagine how it got so large. Whereas in the English localization it says, I don't even want to imagine what creature spawned that monster, which makes no sense. I encountered Nemesis. If I hadn't known in advance, the thing would have infected me. If it's prowling the city, that means it hasn't yet completed its mission. It would appear the STARS officers excel in the art of survival if they manage to survive being chased down by that thing. I'm a bit surprised we don't encounter zombified UBCS personnel. It's only Raccoon City civilians that are infected that we encounter.
All supervisors, mission terminated. Return immediately. Repeat. All supervisors return immediately. Over.
And by the way, in case you're wondering how Leon and Claire got into Raccoon City, the US government abandoned some barricades, including Dillon's private military corporation, in order to prepare for the experimental thermobaric missile strike on October 1st, so this brief lapse in security allowed Leon and Claire to enter Raccoon City.
I'm quite impressed you've managed to stay alive up until now.
And you seem to be
How are they even getting into that secret area in the fireplace without having to destroy it?
doing a pretty good job of looking out for yourself. How about helping out?
I have no intent
What do you mean, help out? Carlos just told you that Nikolai cannot be trusted. Or is she just saying that sarcastically?
of helping you.
Because we're nothing but pawns in all this?
Yeah, she's just saying it sarcastically.
Manner of speaking, you are. Our employers wanted a detailed analysis of the zombie beings which were created through infection
Zombie beings. That is such a silly phrasing.
by the T-virus.
You're saying that they deliberately sent in a military unit to be butchered by their creations?
The UBCS can't really be called a military unit as it's mainly composed of mercenaries. I mean, some of the UBCS members did have military backgrounds and their combat experience was greater than the Umbrella Security Service, or USS for short, but the UBCS aren't exactly a military unit if they're not directly serving the US government. That being said, potential recruits for the UBCS were scouted by military coordinators.
Not exactly. Although the conditions encountered on this operation were extreme, it was an unexpected outcome that the team would be wiped out. We were only required to collect live data from the subjects.
And you were also extracting personnel as well, like with those Umbrella associates. It is interesting how the UBCS were rescuing civilians, yet Dillon's private military company, they weren't rescuing civilians. They were ordered to assist in the evacuation of Umbrella Corp execs and government officials only, and not civilians. So it just seems odd that the UBCS would be deployed to rescue the civilians when the private military company that Umbrella hired, they were told not to rescue civilians. I wonder what the motive behind that is. I get that the UBCS were deployed to not really rescue the civilians, but to collect combat data, but still though, it just seems a bit odd.
Another mutant!
Okay, but I need the acid rounds here, just to speed up this whole process with dealing with the Gravedigger. Strangely, the Gravedigger is a boss where the dodge actually works very well, because it gives you iframes. So why is it that Jill does these roll animations with the Gravedigger that give her iframes, yet with the other dodge animation she does, she doesn't get iframes? That makes no sense. It's so stupid. It makes zero sense why that's the case. But I can make more, freeze rounds here. And that time I got 13. So I think as you craft the same ammunition type, you get more ammo, which is interesting.
What's going on? Whoa!
to wonder why there weren't more gravediggers around, if this is simply, what, like an earthworm that was infected with the T-virus, and it's meant to mirror Yawn's increase in size, like that. Although this one has a lot more mutations, it seems, because it has the teeth developed within it. Unlike Yawn, whose teeth didn't really change. On the Resident Evil podcast team's profile of this particular BOW, they mentioned that the Gravedigger was originally just a small millipede that became secondarily infected by the T-virus, and thanks to the increased contaminants from the underground lab and dead factory, the soil in which this arthropod dwelled underground was heavily contaminated, so this millipede went through repeated molting and metamorphosis inside this infected area, and soon became a creature that bore little resemblance to its original form. And also, you remember those worms back in the hospital when I was playing as Carlos? Those are actually the Gravedigger's offspring. Officially, they're called sliding worms, and they hatched in as little as 2 hours, apparently. And they also had the capacity to mature into a fully grown Gravedigger in just 1 week by shedding their skin over and over again and become more durable each time. Oh, you can dodge that. Never mind. I thought you couldn't dodge that particular lunging attack. It's just the timing on that dodge is very weird. He almost hit me right there when he was closer than usual. I just had to make sure he wasn't doing the lunging attack. Look, it's a decent boss fight. I'm glad that the acid rounds are damaging against him, but the times when he emerges from the ground directly underneath you and you just can't dodge because he hits you before you even have the chance to press the dodge button, it's pretty cheap. And I know a lot of people just stand in this particular spot right here, but I feel like his AI gets a lot more confused with what he wants to do if you're standing in spots like these, and I feel like it's hard to determine where exactly you're supposed to stand to ensure that he doesn't directly emerge from underneath you and prevent you from using the dodge function. But at least he doesn't do too much damage. And this added feature where you wait a bit and you can just use the light posts to take him out, that's only really valid if you're standing right here, because if you take too long to actually hit the lampposts, he will emerge from the ground very quickly and attack you. You have to pretty much knock over these lampposts very quickly when you're standing in this spot to ensure that he always emerges instead of doing his underground attacks. So like as soon as he finishes doing his regular attack and he burrows into the ground, you pretty much have to be right here before the cutscene plays where the lampposts are falling, and then you have to knock him over very quickly so that he's forced to come out of the ground and he won't do his underground attacks, and it can be pretty awkward doing that. Oh! Okay, that was interesting. So I was holding X the entire time when I was firing those 3 shots. I didn't let go of it, and Jill still did the dodge, apparently. That's interesting. So you can still get the dodge input even if you're holding X while you're aiming. That's interesting. And that might actually be better, walking backwards constantly so that you can possibly get his AI to not go underneath you directly before he attacks. This is a bad spot to be in before the cutscene, like I already mentioned. Because I have to run the gamut with his underground attacks. See? But at least the R2 function helped me right there. I was very lucky to get that dodge. Yeah, this is precisely why I said you have to be right next to the lamppost before the cutscene happens, so that you don't run the gambit with his underground attacks. And again, if you're going to be standing in areas like this, or maybe like right over here, you really have to watch out for these camera angles, because the fixed cameras eat your inputs when you're trying to dodge, and it's really dumb. And this part right here is another pointless live selection, because why would you ever want to push him off when you need to get to the water sample room as quickly as possible? It doesn't really make any logical sense to push him up right here. So it's just better to jump off. And Jill really has to hope that water isn't contaminated with the T-virus. But then again, she probably has the antibodies at this point. And also, technically, even if Jill received the vaccine right then and there, she shouldn't have been able to recover immediately. I mean, that's not really how vaccines work. We've taken vaccines. We're always still sick for like a few days or like a few weeks after we take the vaccine. But in this case, the vaccine is like a cure, and it just cures her instantly and gives her the antibodies. I do question if Jill was examined by the US government to see if she still had traces of the T-virus within her, similar to what happened with Sherry, where even after she was given the devil antigen, she still had the G-virus within her, although it was weakened. Okay, treatment plant security manual. Since the treatment plant is a facility that has been outwardly renovated to look like an abandoned factory, there may be rare cases of civilians entering. In these instances, immediately shoot to kill. Additionally, if they surrender, capture and transport them to the laboratory for use in human experiments. The laboratory will pay compensation in such cases. That's pretty grim, and I guess because they own the police force, they can easily hide the debts. But even then, family members would have noticed something, news reporters would have noticed something. I'm amazed Alyssa Ashcroft didn't find any evidence of this. Security system device. The interior of the plant is supervised by a quarantine system. If contamination is detected in the treatment room or decomposition pool, sections of the plant will be automatically locked. In this situation, follow the manual and handle the situation accordingly to manually unlock the system following treatment. If contamination exceeds acceptable levels, lock down the entire facility and await instructions. Anyone who escapes the plant without permission is to be shot and killed, regardless of reason. And now for what is regarded as the trickiest puzzle of Resident Evil 3 OG, but it's fun. Even if it doesn't make any sense and it's purely arcadey, because this is not how water sample machines work. And also, this machine right here is very important because you need to use this to apply a barcode to a key that will allow you to gain access to the rocket launcher if you want to go for it. Water pollution alert. Blocking of the abolition area passage is now in progress. To maintain safety, the lock will not be released until a manual check has been performed. So I guess this is what, a pure water sample? Sample from the treated drainage of this factory. It shows it has passed the water pollution test. This is a pretty dumb puzzle. Even if it is tricky and kinda amusing, I still don't understand the point of it. When you're doing something like checking the water purity level, I mean, who solves a music puzzle for checking the water purity? And you're delaying the player from actually getting the chance to get to Nemesis. And then Carlos comes in and he saves Jill.
Rescuing you is becoming a full-time job.
Thanks, Carlos. I owe you.
Listen closely, Jill. They're going to launch a missile directly into the city as soon as day breaks.
At dawn? But that's only...
Well, too bad reading the files doesn't dynamically change the cutscenes.
I know.
Because you already learned
We
this.
don't have much time left. We have to split up and find a way out of here. And hey, watch out for that traitor Nikolai.
So much splitting up, there's like no point in having any physical contact between them. And he somehow got past the drain demos here. And for some reason, Jill missed the barrel, even though I was holding R2. It's like literally they're dumping all these BOWs here, all these infected contaminants, and is this how it's all getting into the water supply? Yeah, the Magnum is pretty much throwaway at this point. So I know Birkin was delaying any sort of report on T-virus exposure through these kinds of contaminants, because he was trying to distract Umbrella while he was working on the G-virus. I question if Birkin has actually been here. Plant Manager's Diary. April 25th. Today is my 30th birthday. I can't believe my first day assigned to a new job landed on a day like this. It's quite demanding compared to the university lab. May 14th. The treatment system's finally been completed. It uses a special gas to break test subjects down at the cellular level. Though it had a period of testing prior to being put to practical use, it's still a tad unstable. May 20th. The door suddenly jammed shut while I was inspecting the treatment room. I was trapped in there for an hour with that dreadful odor. I even had the key card, but it's useless during a technical hitch. I can't stand this. June 7th. The recent processing amounts are unusual. The machinery is not in good shape. Lab side aren't listening to me at all. Shit, that idiot Dr. Frankenstein? Why are they mentioning Dr. Frankenstein in the Japanese version? Frankenstein was also mentioned in Resident Evil 4 Remake in the Regenerator Diary, which was not even a diary or analysis on the Regenerator. It's just some guy rambling. That is ridiculous. So they, for some reason, included Dr. Frankenstein in the Japanese version of this file, but it's removed in the English localization. July 16th. Our processing has reached a breaking point. The chemical solutions they sent us for the treatment are also terrible quality. Why are they calling it liquid medicine for the English localization? July 29th. Even as functions decline, we have a massive amount to process. Contamination levels have increased and the virus antibodies can't totally handle the new strain. Some staff are becoming infected. I'm working with a handgun in my hand. The last shots for myself. I want to weep. I don't want to die like this. Contemplating the pain of dying makes me feel sick. Oh nice, more gunpowder, so I can make more freeze rounds. Freeze rounds are the best way to deal with Nemesis when you're fighting him in that room. It's far better than using the handles to launch that acid into him. It's so clunky trying to do that. 19 rounds, that's crazy. 55 freeze rounds, that is insane. It is crazy the amount of ammo you can get. But even then, it's proportional to the number of enemies you're dealing with, and the ammo is actually valuable in this game compared to Resident Evil 1 Remake, for instance, or Resident Evil 2 Remake. I do want to bring the knife with me for the treatment plant encounter, just to demonstrate how awkward it is. I did find a method that works for like the first two phases, but then the final phase where Nemesis loses his head literally and he's just flailing and attacking all over the place, I don't have a good strategy for that if you're not using the freeze rounds. And bringing the pistol along is a better choice as well, because I can at least hit the final handle at a distance. It is a bit strange how post-Clock Tower Nemesis, the boss fights now have these intended designs where you can do them without having to use anything greater than a full magazine from a pistol. The Gravedigger has those lampposts, Treatment Plant Nemesis has those handles that disperse acid, and Final Form Nemesis can only be killed with the railgun. Like, it's such a bizarre shift in the design mentalities, and I can't really understand why the developers thought those handles in the Treatment Plant Nemesis encounter were implemented well when you have to rely upon such weird strategies to manipulate Nemesis's AI to walk into the acid, or hope he gets stunned in the right spot when you hit him with the freeze rounds. Not to mention, you have to hope Jill prioritizes the correct handle because the auto-aim can work incorrectly, and don't even get me started on the idea of using the knife during that encounter, as it's nothing but a carnival of stupidity. The gameplay gets broken down so much that there's no way using the knife would feel intentional or rational in a sane person's mind. Of course, the people who've succumbed to knife-only brain rot will say otherwise. So this upcoming boss fight against Nemesis is no problem when you have the freeze rounds. He dies very fast. The freeze rounds are definitely the best option against him, and it even stuns him too. It puts him into a very hard stun, but the problem is Nemesis has the ability to bypass the stuns from the freeze rounds when he goes into certain animations. It's really bullshit. It's why in the final phase, when he's attacking constantly, and rarely does he decide to just simply walk, it's almost impossible to make him flinch properly, or at least with any level of consistency. It's really dumb. And again, there's like no story with this treatment plant. Like, nothing really big happening aside from dealing with Nemesis, but that's not even related to, like, the background of this treatment plant facility.
Proceeding with operation in the treatment room. Please evacuate immediately.
Or actually, I'm not supposed to use the knife against him when I'm using the handles. I use the pistol. Yeah, so he's invulnerable as he's dropping down, but you can use this time to get some distance from him. Just keep on stun locking him and he's done. And it's a well-designed encounter with the freeze rounds, but just trying to use the handles here is awkward. See, he's like already dead, but then when you use the handles here, it's just really bad. Like, this is the method that I found, so I'm gonna use the pistol here. So I come over here, I stand right around here to get him to lunge at me. Yeah, he has to do this specific animation. Then you get him to do that animation right there so that he gets hit by the acid. And also, for some weird reason, you saw how quickly the acid came out? There are times when it takes even longer for the acid to come out. I don't know why the time it takes for the acid to deploy varies. It's really stupid. But right here, you've got to hide it over here, because in this second phase, Nemesis gains access to an undodgeable move, or rather, he tracks you so hard, it's almost impossible to get around because he has this range attack where he does this long wind-up and launches a tentacle at you, and you can dodge it, but the problem is the timing is so strict to the point of being unresponsive, just like with Krauser's attacks in Resident Evil 4 Remake in the final phase when you're dealing with his mutated form. It's really stupid. And the weird thing is, Nemesis does that same move during the clock tower encounter if you choose to fight the tentacle nemesis, and you can dodge it with better consistency compared to when he does it here, so I don't know why the timing on the dodge is different. Okay, so I gotta stand in the same way. See, like that, and make sure you move as such, because he has so much range in that back attack he just did. He can hit you oftentimes when you're running away from him. But he's gonna get hit by the acid. There we go. And then this is the part that's completely random. I have no idea how to get Nemesis to come towards me. Like, he's attacking right now, he's just gonna blindly attack, but I just cannot get him to walk consistently. Can you lock on to the goddamn handle, please? Not that one. You see what I mean? This is another problem with using the handles. Jill's auto-aim is a massive hindrance in this encounter because she refuses to lock on to the second handle. She instead prioritized the one that was furthest from me. It's like you gotta be right next to it for it to work. And she still missed it somehow. Like, why? This is precisely why you gotta use the knife here. Because the R2 auto-aim is badly programmed in this game. And I just got very lucky just then. I'm amazed he didn't attack me right there. Why he even chose to walk towards me, I have no idea. Yeah, but sometimes you'll have to use the dodge system to avoid that back attack. But he can literally spend the entire 2 minutes just mindlessly slashing, and there's nothing you can do to get him over here. No, he's not gonna make it. See, it's just completely random. This last phase is really stupid when trying to use the handles. And don't even get me started on the amount of shit I had to do to actually figure out the first 2 valves. And the thing is, back when I played this game, like, years ago, I actually found a different method, but it was a lot more awkward to pull off. And using that method, I sort of gained an idea as to how his AI works. Let me show you guys. This is what I did years ago, and it's really, really awkward. But this would work consistently on the first valve, but then the second and third valves, there's just no consistency. So, like, what I did was I stood here, And I got him to do his low attack. He's gonna walk in a circle now, and I gotta get away. But right now he's gonna do his long-range thrust attack with his tentacle, and it's so stupid. But that time I dodged it. I don't know how I dodged it, because the timing is very unresponsive. And even when I do dodge it, she still gets hit. But the main point here is I try to get him here and then bait out his low attack the same way. And I missed, unfortunately. Be careful of his animation canceling. Okay, he's not walking directly backwards into the wall. He's walking at kind of an angle, so he's not going to do the long-range thrust attack, unfortunately. Because Nemesis is very keen on trying to perform that long-range thrust attack, even when he's doing the programming, where he has to back up to avoid the acid. His AI is just super janky when you're trying to use the handles. See, the dodge didn't register. Didn't register again. The timing just doesn't make sense on that move. It's like you have to be at mid-range instead of far range, but failed again. And again, my dodges were just failing for no reason. This is what I mean with his AI. His AI is just so awkward to handle. His AI is just very awkward to handle if you're not using the freeze rounds. I don't know if Nemesis is actually taking damage to his actual HP. Like, I don't know if there's like two separate health bars at play. One health bar specific to just shooting him in general, and another health bar specific to the acid. Because it feels like even when I use the acid and he's in the final phase, it takes the same amount of freeze rounds to take him out. So I have no idea how his health is actually working here. You gotta be at just the right range where he does nothing but this move. And you do not want him to do that stupid long-range thrust with the inconsistent dodge. Yeah, there we go, see? You see how he was keen on trying to lunge at me with that attack because he was walking directly backwards and he identified my position correctly, so because I was far away, he decided to do this thrust move instead of fulfilling the programming where he has to back up. That's what I used to my advantage in the second phase. And then this is where stupidity is set into motion, because there's no telling what Nemesis does in this final phase. He just continually slashes. He could walk towards me right now. He could accidentally hit me with a thrust attack. He could be doing the back attack even when I'm not behind him. Oh no! God damn it. It's just really, really silly. And I can't even lock onto the handle with my pistol because she'll prioritize the wrong one. She's not prioritizing the right one. It's so dumb. And look at that again. I mean, she's not prioritizing the closest one. She keeps prioritizing the furthest one with her pistol. And he's just backed up for no reason. Where is he even going? What is he doing right now? And I can't just like use the D-pad to turn Jill because when I'm holding R2 and I move the D-pad, she just misses all the items and objects that she can hit. It's just a really awkward encounter, and it's just filled with poor designs if you're trying to use the handles. That's why it's just better to use the freeze rounds. Yeah, forget this. I'm just gonna use the freeze rounds. And I previously thought you had to finish him off with the acid. It was only during these multiple playthroughs of Resident Evil 3 OG Remastered that I just had the thought of using freeze rounds, because I remembered Carcinogen SDA using the freeze rounds against Nemesis here in his video, and I'm like, it's probably just there to stun him so that he's vulnerable to the acid, but no, you are actually doing damage to him and you can kill him here. Because I assumed it was the acid that you were deploying on him that makes him mutate into the form that he assumes in his final boss fight, but it's not. It's other factors. The game doesn't really communicate well that you can finish him off without having to use the acid. And he's dead. Or at least incapacitated for the moment. That's definitely a better boss fight than Clock Tower Nemesis with the bullshit prevalent with him. Okay guys, so I'm having to re-record this entire part right here because I had a capture failure that was entirely my fault, because when I saved the footage of the final part of Resident Evil 3 OG, I turned off my PS5 too quickly before it had a chance to fully render the video, and so my video got screwed up. So that is precisely why I'm having to re-record this, and luckily the quick save I made has really helped out. Once again, gotta give a lot of praise to the quick save functionality in Resident Evil 3 OG, because when I encounter errors like what I encountered, the quick save helps me to get back to the exact point where I can begin my new recording. So let us begin. Yeah, so Nemesis's body is going to fall down, and I'm guessing he's exposed to other contaminants, or he regenerates, or he's being sent to the incineration plant, I believe. Which I'm a bit confused with the location of the incineration plant, if it's showing this cutscene where Nemesis is dropping down. I'm not quite understanding how that's possible. And I'm guessing Nemesis was also exposed to some T-virus contaminants within this area, which is how he's able to regenerate briefly. And then when he gets to his final boss fight, he eats that tyrant and he grows even more.
Warning. Missile attack confirmed. All personnel evacuate immediately.
But anyway, before I actually move on to Nemesis's encounter, I'm going to get the rocket launcher. And by the way, that bubbling in the water, is that supposed to be Nemesis? Because they only show this camera angle briefly, and then as soon as you get to the next camera angle, you can't look down anymore. But ignoring that, in order to get the rocket launcher, you need to make sure you have the card key and also the facility key. In fact, I'm heading in the wrong direction because I have to imprint the radioactive barcode on the key back in the water sample room. And you're free to use your weapons to your heart's content, because the final boss can only be defeated using the railgun. You can weaken Nemesis with the missile launcher, so it will take fewer shots from the railgun to actually kill him. Oh dear. Well, this is making it easy for the hunters to surround me. But as I was saying, you can use the missile launcher to weaken Nemesis so that it takes fewer shots from the railgun to finish him off, but you can't actually kill him with the missile launcher, it seems. You know, I question how exactly this treatment plant facility has a built-in sensor that is then tied to an announcer that says a missile strike is occurring. I'm surprised Umbrella would have such a feature built into a random treatment plant facility that's considered abandoned. Or like, it looks abandoned as a facade. Like, it's still functional, but why would they have a feature like a missile sensor built into this facility? Not really sure I understand that. Because there is no kind of missile sensor in Resident Evil 3 Remake. You just heard the announcement that the missile was coming on the TV. So it made logical sense that Umbrella wouldn't really have that kind of system built in place with their Nest facility. I do wonder if it actually makes sense to put in a Nest facility underneath the hospital, because I remember Wary the Rook criticized the way Nest appeared in Resident Evil 2 Remake, but I mean, the Nest facility in Resident Evil 2 Remake is not in the sewers of Raccoon City, it's on the outskirts of Raccoon City in the industrial zone, so that at least justifies the space that's there. But given that the Nest facility in Resident Evil 3 Remake is underneath the hospital, you have to wonder how they made that much space, because Joe didn't take any kind of tram in Resident Evil 3 Remake to get to the Nest 2 facility. But that being said, it was still a cool idea to consolidate a lot of the important stuff that happens in the areas of Resident Evil 3 OG to the hospital, because the hospital feels like the right location to have a research facility for the virus, even if the doctors in Resident Evil 3 Remake struggle to actually help their patients. I do wonder when exactly Dr. Bard figured out how to make the vaccine for the T-virus. I don't think it's properly detailed in Resident Evil 3 Remake, but regardless, the way Resident Evil 3 Remake handles its story elements and its areas is definitely better than Resident Evil 3 OG, which only had these additional areas just for the player, and there's nothing else that served the story or the characters or anything with the lore. Also, right here, you can shoot down Nikolai's chopper with the rocket launcher, but you can also take it down with the Magnum, and it takes only 5 shots from the Magnum to take down the chopper. And taking down the chopper is pretty simple. It's easy to dodge its missiles, which is good. And so you go here.
You're still alive. Such persistence.
Nikolai?
Sorry, but there is no escape from here.
So let's see both of the cutscenes before I get rid of him with the rocket launcher.
So, you want to get out of here alone? Is that your plan?
I made certain none of the other supervisors survived.
I question why Jill tries to open up with that kind of statement. Like she's sarcastically saying, I want to be rescued as well. It doesn't really make sense why she would say that particular line to start a negotiation with Nikolai.
Since I'll be the only one who knows what really happened, I'll have more bargaining power when it comes to discussing my bonus.
You know, it is odd how he says he's the only one who will have any knowledge of what happened, yet the Umbrella personnel had access to video cameras, and that was how Spencer got all the footage from the incident that he then doctored to make it seem like the UBCS were saving civilians properly, and he also removed any mention or showcase of BOWs from those videos. So is Nikolai really the only one who knows what happened? Unless he's talking about everything that's happened after September 29th?
On their payroll.
They want you eliminated for reasons of their own. The amount is modest, but there is a reward to be claimed upon the confirmation of your death.
And he loses his chance to kill Jill right here because of the experimental thermobaric missile strike.
Although I'm sure I'll miss you, it's time to say goodbye. You can either accept death with dignity or die with regret. It's entirely up to you.
Yeah, I definitely think it was a better idea to design Nikolai the way he was in Resident Evil 3 Remake, even if his dialogue can be pretty silly at times. Like, they make Nikolai feel like such a cliched villain. Your typical villain with an apple that they eat just to look like an asshole, and he's saying all these really silly lines. Like, just the way he talks with Jill when he's taunting her prior to the treatment plan Nemesis encounter, or when he's just saying, are all STARS members this soft, or just acting like a total asshole. It was very off-putting in Resident Evil 3 Remake, but I at least appreciate Resident Evil 3 Remake's efforts to change Nikolai's background to make him more relevant to the current Resident Evil universe by having him work for both Umbrella and the rival company instead, and also setting him up for a potential return thanks to the second helicopter that was nearby when Jill left him behind. I'm still not sure if the rival company he works for is the same rival company that Wesker works for, since Umbrella had many rivals, but it's kind of a step in the right direction compared to how in the canon timeline Nikolai's presence is unimportant and all he's here for is money, and given that we have the option of taking him down, it means that he's likely dead in the canon timeline. But assuming the developers consider Resident Evil 3 Remake canon, it's possible he may return, though I highly doubt the developers would bring him back anytime soon, not even for a title like Resident Evil Requiem. Like, how many legacy characters are they actually going to use in Resident Evil 9? Because so far we've only seen Alyssa Ashcroft, and Leon is assumed to be in the game. I just wish they made Resident Evil 9 focus more on like Zoe Baker, because Zoe at least has ties to the Winters family. She's seen the BSAA's corruption, she's been a victim of the Baker incident, and she's seen Blue Umbrella, and she's an amateur reporter in New Orleans as well. Like Alyssa. I mean, Alyssa was more so a journalist, but Zoe would have been the perfect character to make Resident Evil 7, Village, and Requiem a trilogy. Because the Resident Evil games typically operate like a trilogy, because you have Resident Evil 1 through 3 acting like the Raccoon City trilogy, you have Resident Evil 4 through 6 showcasing the aftermath of Umbrella's downfall and their data leaking onto the black market, and also with the rise of other terrorist organizations, and then you have Resident Evil 7, Village, and Requiem that could have easily served as a trilogy for the Winters family, and Zoe had ties to Ethan Winters because Ethan rescued her when he made that call to the BSAA to search for her. So I feel like they could have easily interlinked Zoe's story with what they wanted to do with Raccoon City and potentially with Blue Umbrella and also with the BSAA's corruption. Like, you're at least wrapping up those loose ends by favoring Zoe Baker as the main character, but I just don't understand why all of a sudden they chose to focus on Grace Ashcroft out of nowhere. And I know they mentioned that the Resident Evil games don't exactly pick up the exact thread that was left on the previous game, but still though, it just seems like such an odd time because this is a mainline entry that we're talking about. But anyway, let me take down Nikolai. Sayonara, sucker. And I know there's like additional dialogue with Carlos in the Negotiate with Nikolai live selection, but it's pretty much the same as this, only this one is a bit shorter.
Jill, what happened?
Carlos. The choppers.
I guess this is it then. But I don't want to die in a place like this. This isn't over yet. I'm not giving up, Jill. We still have a chance.
And if you go through this door and then go back in, you can get the cutscene with Barry here, where he's on the radio.
Jill!
This is John Shepard. Over. I've come to retrieve Jill. I can see there's no time left to bring her back.
I question who exactly Barry is trying to contact. And how does he know Jill is still around? How does he know she's still alive?
This is the stars. Please come in, Jill. Here. Are you there to come? Come in.
Hey! He just called your name.
Who could it be?
It doesn't matter. We should tell him where we are.
And I question what exactly took Barry so long to actually get a chopper and go to Raccoon City. Like in Resident Evil Revelations 2, the way Barry obtained Moira's distress call was that there was a BSAA base near the island where the signal was received, which was then analyzed at BSAA HQ. That being said, the BSAA wasn't forthcoming with this information. Barry, who was already tracking down his daughter on his own, had to use forceful means in order to obtain information on the island and went in alone to find her. And this was 6 months after the events of Claire's scenario in Revelations 2. This is what Yasuhiro Anpo described in an interview with Project Umbrella. So I question if something similar happened here with why it took Barry so long to actually get in the chopper and go to Raccoon City on October 1st. Like, he must have been prompted to go to Raccoon City because of the announcement of the missile strike.
That's it. We've got to find a way out of here. Now!
Warning. Missile attack confirmed. Warning. Missile attack confirmed. Emergency level D. All personnel evacuate immediately.
Still so odd that they have this built-in system for a missile strike specifically and not for like a self-destruct sequence. There's also this file here. So the Thermal Treatment Plant Manual. The Thermal Treatment Plant is one of the systems for processing waste generated by each research facility. The plant incinerates waste and outdated research equipment that cannot be chemically treated in the gas treatment room, with an additional function as a power supply to the research facilities by generating thermal power. Generating this power accumulates a high amount of electricity, a portion of which is stored in a large power storage battery installed in the plant basement, which is also designed to function as an emergency power supply in the event of an emergency. The emergency power supply circuit becomes operational only after 3 installed emergency circuit units are connected to their sockets. If a connection cannot be established, there is also a way to forcibly activate the system by manually inserting all the emergency circuit units. And I don't know why they give you shotgun shells before this moment when ammo is meaningless. And then we have this classified photo file. I think it's still too early to deploy the Devil Sword of Paracelsus into actual combat, but if we need it as a trump card in our op to seize the G-Virus developed by Umbrella, then so be it. And again, we already know that Jill has knowledge about the G-Virus, but it is cool that they actually take the time to mention the G-Virus here. I just wonder why the G-Virus wasn't mentioned in earlier parts of Resident Evil 3 OG. Although the rail cannon's power is more than acceptable, do be careful as there are also many issues with it. For the glory of the United States of America, strike the treasonous down with this magnetic iron hammer. Colonel of Technology, Franklin Hart. So I question if this division of the US government was called in because of Birkin, because the Resident Evil podcast team did mention that US soldiers came in to try to extract Birkin after he tried to sell his research to them, but that failed. So I'm not too sure if they're related to what's shown in the classified photo file.
Checking system. Checking battery. Warning. There is not enough power to activate the system.
Yeah, so this boss fight against Nemesis is pretty dumb. And it's also kind of random what Nemesis does. But here he's eating the Tyrant, and apparently the reason why we see a Tyrant here, and there's also other Tyrants throughout the area, is because these Tyrants were dropped off a helicopter by Sergei Vladimir in order to ambush a US Special Forces team that was sent in to retrieve William Birkin, and they've been hunkered down in this area for almost a week apparently, which makes sense since they were supposed to extract William Birkin on September 23rd, and that was also the same day William injected himself with the G-Virus. And apparently the exact number of Tyrants that Sergei Vladimir deployed was 6. 1 at the RPD to recover the G-Virus, and the rest to be deployed here to ambush the US Special Forces team, which just seems a bit too extreme if you ask me. Also, these soldiers were not supposed to be here. It was a total accident. As the Resident Evil podcast team highlight in their timeline, because the rail cannon is so heavy and needs to be transported via rail, the incursion route into Raccoon City will be via the underground freight train access, which leads from the mountains to level B7 of the underground lab. From there, the team can hopefully work their way up to Birkin's P4 lab, but because the US government has very limited knowledge of the facility layout, their intelligence is unreliable and the special forces take the wrong elevator. Instead of arriving at the underground laboratory, they actually emerge at the P12A incinerator facility. After securing the area, the soldiers begin hooking up the rail cannon to the electrical generators. They then lay low and wait for Birkin to rendezvous with them, completely unaware they are in the wrong facility, which is quite ridiculous. And also the whole idea of transporting that large rail cannon through these tiny corridors? How the hell did they do that? I can definitely understand why they changed this particular story point regarding the rail cannon in Resident Evil 3 Remake. The ferromagnetic infantry use next generation railgun was instead made by NES 2 lead researcher Cornell Garner, with the United States Army serving as assisting developers in Resident Evil 3 Remake, and its purpose was to suppress new BOWs in case of outbreak, which helps in complementing the idea that the US government was involved with Umbrella in the production of BOWs and also with the suppression of BOWs, which is interesting. And we know that the United States government was one of Umbrella's first customers. And at least this railgun in Resident Evil 3 Remake wasn't just transported out of the facility easily. It was still undergoing testing to actually improve the mobility of it. And yet somehow in Resident Evil 3 OG, these US Special Forces somehow brought this large rail cannon with them through tight corridors and into this area. Like, that just doesn't make any sense. Once again, it's stuff like this from Resident Evil 3 OG that was never going to be remade very well in Resident Evil 3 Remake, so they had to change it completely and make it a bit more logical. I will say though, I'd rather take this boss fight than the final boss of Resident Evil 3 Remake. Because the final boss of Resident Evil 3 Remake is pretty bullshit in certain parts. Like with those stupid pustules that are so omniscient and they hone in on your location far too easily. And then they stun you and that gives Nemesis a free hit to hit you. But you have to wait here. It's best to move now. Oh crap. At least the acid is dissipating right now. It's random if Nemesis drops down or not. This is such a bizarrely placed rail cannon. It's right behind a structure that its cannon is going to impact. Like, why is it designed like this? It's really bizarre. It makes a lot more sense for the rail cannon to be portable, especially since in Resident Evil Vendetta, Nadia had used a prototype portable rail cannon that was provided to the BSAA by the US military by way of informal assistance, and using twin rails, the weapon used electromagnetic induction to fire a tungsten alloy armor-piercing projectile at such an initial velocity not possible in regular heavy weapons. It was also powered by a compact fuel cell, and it took 2 hours to recharge after each shot. But Nadia used this weapon to damage Arriego, and it also destroyed several buildings behind Arriego, and Nadia was unconcerned as she could confirm via a readout on her scope that all the buildings were empty, there were no civilians. But that much power and Arriego is still standing, and it only grazed him. So I think maybe the railgun was designed as such in Resident Evil 3 Remake to then tie into Resident Evil Vendetta. Although the railgun that Jill used in Resident Evil 3 Remake required a physical connection to 3 batteries. But I guess in the time lapse between 1998 and 2014, it's only logical that further developments into this technology would lead to more improvements. And plus we saw in Resident Evil Death Island that Jill utilized a plasma rifle, and the plasma rifle was not connected to any batteries. And she was quite familiar with the technology as well, which was surprising. She just knew immediately that she was using a plasma rifle. So I guess her time using that railgun in Resident Evil 3 Remake. That's assuming the remakes are actually canon, though. Because they can't be canon because they contradict certain details in later Resident Evil titles. But I mean, you could make the argument that certain changes that they made in Resident Evil 2 Remake and Resident Evil 3 Remake maybe don't impact the canonicity of certain events, only the character moments. Because a lot of the character moments in Resident Evil 2 Remake were done poorly, but Resident Evil 3 Remake had some good character moments, and the motivations of the characters. It's like if those moments from Resident Evil 3 Remake were present in Resident Evil 3 OG, maybe it wouldn't have affected the canonicity of certain events, but that remains to be seen. Gotta run now. I need him over here. I don't want him climbing too soon. He's firing acid. He's climbing up, it looks like. Yeah, he's climbing up. It's like he's programmed to climb up every time the railgun fires. Okay, he's down. He's firing acid. And that second cannon shot didn't work for some reason. He's firing acid. See, where was that second shot again? Like, why did it disappear? And Nemesis' intelligence has eroded so much, he doesn't recognize that he needs to destroy the rail cannon to stop taking damage. And it's done. I will say that the first time I did this boss fight for Resident Evil 3 OG Remastered, it was just so stupid. I mean, it's a gimmick fight, but it's just a really silly gimmick fight. And if you get very unlucky with Nemesis firing acid, and the acid pools linger for way longer than necessary, and he traps you in a corner, you're screwed. And running past him is also awkward, because as he's walking towards you, his tentacles are actively attacking. Not actively attacking, he does have to proc the animation before attacking, but you don't realize he's attacking sometimes because you don't really notice any kind of startup animation. So you never want to put yourself in a position where you have to run past him. That's why you gotta wait by that second battery the way I do, just like everyone else does. It's just such a silly encounter, honestly. At least this doesn't overstay its welcome, so long as you're doing it right. Although saying so long as you're doing it right, really doesn't make sense because it really feels like there's only one way you're supposed to do this.
Enter cooldown mode.
And I don't know why it does this whole moment where the railgun announces that it's going into cooldown mode because we never use it again. And why was that just tied to the railgun, this lock on the door?
Stars? I'll give you stars.
And I know a lot of people were very critical about the whole moment in Resident Evil 3 Remake where Jill says this line at a very early point in the game when she's running from Nemesis and trying to lure Nemesis away from the people who are getting on the train. I mean, I understand the context for the placement of that quote in Resident Evil 3 Remake because, of course, when Jill is saying, "You want stars, I'll give you stars," that obviously makes sense in a luring context where she's trying to lure Nemesis away rather than here where it's just her conveying her annoyance with Nemesis constantly hassling her. And so, because Nemesis keeps saying stars, Jill's idea of delivering the final blow is to say, "You want stars, I'll give you stars." I mean, I don't have a problem with either placement, but just take your pick. It's fine. It's entirely subjective.
Jill, look! Chopper's coming in! Yes!
Thanks, you saved us.
I couldn't let you die.
And there's Barry right there.
Is it you?
Are you ready to finish this?
Finishing what exactly? I don't feel like that's the right quote for this kind of context. "You ready to go home" feels more befitting for this kind of context where they're leaving Raccoon City. Or is Barry referring to the potential fight against Umbrella later on?
It's coming!
Yeah. It's the end.
I do like him saying "it's the end." I just like the way the voice actor says that, combined with the music. You know, it's still hard to believe that in Resident Evil Outbreak, for some reason they show multiple missile strikes occurring, when in Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 3 Remake, it's only one experimental thermobaric missile. So why does Resident Evil Outbreak try to contradict this whole moment? That doesn't make sense. Resident Evil Outbreak does have some controversial moments that put the canonicity into question, and that series of missiles is definitely one of them. I don't know if this blast is actually engulfing the entire city, but Resident Evil 3 OG and Resident Evil 3 Remake really try to make it seem like this experimental thermobaric missile strike engulfed the entire city, and yet somehow a lot of the buildings are intact in Resident Evil Requiem. So that kind of stuff is going to happen in games because you want to draw the line between a realistic portrayal of a experimental thermobaric missile strike that has the equivalence of a nuke, but then you also want to impress the fans that want to see iconic locations as well. But still, though, you don't need to go back to Raccoon City. When you're talking about new BOWs, new vectors, new terrorist organizations, Raccoon City is obsolete. I mean, the Lanshang incident and the Adonia incident from Resident Evil 6 are worse than the Raccoon City incident. And then the Dovi incident with the E-type eudomycete spreading out in the swamplands over the span of weeks. And then Blue Umbrella had to erect a quarantine wall as well in that period of weeks. Those outbreaks feel worse than the Raccoon City incident. And also, the previous rumors that Resident Evil Requiem would take place in Singapore, that would have been pretty interesting. I would have wanted to see a Singaporean environment in a Resident Evil game, because a lot of the Resident Evil games that take place in foreign countries are pretty interesting with some of the things they do. And it's also quite interesting when they involve politics, because that was one of the most interesting parts about Resident Evil Damnation, when they were basing the movie in the Eastern Slav Republic, which is a fictional place, but it's kind of meant to mirror Russia in a way. And we know Umbrella formerly had a base in Caucasus that was taken down in 2003. And there are Russian characters working for Umbrella, like with Nikolai and with Sergei. And also you have Panamstan, which is a fictional place on the border of China. And so they use that particular location and the civil war that occurred there to enrich the universe of Resident Evil even more. There's so many different locations you could put a Resident Evil environment in. And Romania was one of the coolest choices for Resident Evil Village. And the environment is breathtaking in Resident Evil Village. It's one of the most impressive looking villages I've ever seen. Maybe even the most impressive looking village by far. Like, you don't need to return to Raccoon City just because it's the 30th anniversary of Resident Evil. But if they do something interesting in Raccoon City, that'll be cool. I just don't know if they will, though, because Resident Evil 4 Remake set a bad precedent. But then again, because of the fact that each Resident Evil game is handled by a different director, I should expect a different level of quality from Resident Evil Requiem. Like, look at the way this blast is annihilating these buildings. There is no feasible way these buildings should be standing in Resident Evil Requiem. But as I mentioned before, the way the ruins looked in Resident Evil Outbreak and in Resident Evil The Umbrella Chronicles, it did feel a bit too exaggerated. I know people like to exaggerate the capabilities of nukes, but when governments deploy nukes, sometimes they'll deploy the nukes in midair. I mean, that's what happened with the bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. They detonated the nukes in midair using a control device. I don't know the exact control device they used. But they detonated the nukes in midair so that the radiation would spread out over a greater area. And so there wasn't much of a blast crater in those particular locations. But it seems like the experimental thermobaric missile strike did impact the ground, because we see that crater in Resident Evil Requiem, and obviously it would have to impact the ground if it was trying to take down BOWs. But are there still older BOWs around in these buildings around the outskirts of the blast? But again, this whole idea of outskirts shouldn't exist if the blast area covered by this missile strike, it seemed to cover the entire city. And I know people have commented saying that maybe they're redeveloping Raccoon City, but that can't be, though, because Raccoon City is constantly under government surveillance, and there could be other BOWs around. They used a similar missile in Resident Evil 6 when they destroyed Tall Oaks, and we haven't heard any mention of Tall Oaks. I don't think they're redeveloping that area anytime soon, especially when this missile directly impacted the ground, unlike the World War II nukes that were used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which, again, detonated in midair. And so once the radiation was gone, people could move back into the areas again.
That's it. Umbrella's going down.
Okay, so she says Umbrella's going down, so I guess that relates back to what Barry said. Are you ready to finish this?
And now we have a rather unfortunate turn of events. It seems that the President and the Federal Council have passed judgment over the civilians of Raccoon.
When they say Federal Council, is that referring to the special committee that decided to bomb Raccoon City? So is Simmons part of that Federal Council? Same with Senator Ron Davis. Maybe Senator Ron Davis was a part of the Federal Council if he's a senator. But was Simmons really a part of that? Was he on the Federal Council or a part of a separate special committee?
Raccoon City. The President and Federal Council have ruled that the Bacillus terminate operation.
Yeah, that right there is also crazy too. Operation Bacillus Terminate. I had no idea Resident Evil 3 OG used the term right here. I thought Resident Evil 6 was the first to use this term, but I was wrong.
Operation is the best course of action for this extreme situation.
It's also worth mentioning that as a cover story, it was believed that a radiation leak and an unknown pathogen were responsible for the Raccoon City incident. The T-Virus and Umbrella's involvement were covered up, and obviously Umbrella is going to do whatever they can to delay the Raccoon trials, and it's only when Wesker steals their data from the Caucasus laboratory and then anonymously gives it to the courts in order to prosecute Umbrella that Umbrella is finally brought down and exposed for their crime. And then the Terra Grigia panic in 2004 is when the existence of BOWs is revealed to the public.
And have since executed. Based on that fact, Raccoon City has been literally wiped off the map. Current reports of the death toll...
If we're going back to Raccoon City, so be it. I just hope they make a good story, they present good characters, and the gameplay is going to be amazing. And I hope to God Koshi Nakanishi, when he's directing Resident Evil Requiem, he's going to deliver the best possible experience by far. I hope he doesn't fall from his pedestal like Anpo-san did when he directed Resident Evil 4 Remake.
Passing the 100,000 mark. Our hearts go out to those poor civilians of Raccoon City.
There was still a small percentage of survivors, because you have Leon, Claire, Sherry, Jill, Carlos, the Outbreak survivors. Alyssa was one of them. I wonder if she'll talk about the Raccoon City incident when you get to play as Grace in those past sequences where you're with Alyssa. But yeah, this game was a lot of fun. It's of comparable quality to the Resident Evil 3 remake, and again, Resident Evil 3 remake is unfairly criticized by a lot of fans. This game does have its positives, it does have its negatives, as I've already acknowledged throughout this playthrough. It's going to be a lot to elaborate on when I get to my Resident Evil 3 retrospective, but this is pretty much the end of the game. I mean, there are a bunch of epilogues that you can get if you replay Resident Evil 3 OG multiple times, but I don't consider them worth it right now. So this has been a critical, insightful, and fun playthrough of Resident Evil 3 OG. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.